What the Music Knew. By Zelvara. Chapter 1. Every Room Has a Ceiling. The rent party had been going since 9 o'clock, and it was now past midnight, and the room had reached the particular pitch of itself that Estelle Beaumont had been waiting for since she'd walked in. She could feel it the way she could feel a key change coming before she played it, a shift in the air, something loosening in the crowd, the particular surrender of people who have stopped thinking about how they look and started thinking about nothing at all. It happened at every good rent party, eventually. The well-dressed arrivals stopped arranging themselves and the musicians stopped watching the clock, and the room became, for an hour or two, the truest version of what a room could be. She did not allow herself the same surrender. This was not, she had found, a choice she had to make consciously anymore. It had become the thing she was, Estelle Beaumont at the bandstand, precise and magnetic and perfectly composed, giving the room everything it had come for and nothing it hadn't been offered. She could feel when people wanted more. She gave them exactly what she had decided to give and not a fraction beyond. It was, she understood, a kind of genius. It was also, she had never said aloud to anyone, a kind of exhaustion. The brownstone was on 136th Street and it was packed to the crown molding, musicians and painters and women who wrote for the Messenger and men who had come up from downtown to see what Harlem had decided it was this season. The piano had been pushed to the far wall and someone had strung lights along the ceiling that swayed when people moved too close, sending amber warmth rolling across the room in slow waves. It smelled like pressed bodies and good bourbon and the particular sharp sweetness of someone's gardenias dying beautifully in a vase by the window. Estelle played. She played the way she had been playing since she was 9 years old, and her father had first sat her down at the upright in the front room and told her that music was the only honest language left, which had been a lie but also, as she'd come to understand, the most useful kind of lie, the kind that points, imprecisely, at a true thing. She had been playing since then, and she was 31 years old now, and she had made of it something extraordinary, which she knew because rooms told her so. Rooms and the people in them and the columns in the society pages and Rollins, who had been her booking agent for 4 years and who communicated approval primarily through the sheer enthusiasm with which he counted money. She played, and the room listened, and she felt the room the way she always felt it, as a thing she was inside of and outside of simultaneously, part of the warmth and also the architect of it. Her hands knew the music without her. Her mind was elsewhere. It was not, she would have said if asked, wandering. Estelle Beaumont's mind did not wander. It moved, precisely, along tracks she had laid herself, assessing and cataloging and managing. The couple near the far door who had come in an argument and were now listing toward reconciliation, the young man by the piano who was trying to work out what her left hand was doing and getting most of it wrong, the woman in the green dress who had been looking at her since the first song with an expression Estelle recognized as admiration sharpening towards something more specific and more complicated. She gave the woman in the green dress a smile calibrated to acknowledge and gently foreclose. The woman understood and looked away. Estelle played. Her drummer, Calvin, caught her eye over the heads of the crowd and lifted one eyebrow in a question, the silent language they had developed over 3 years of playing together, the vocabulary of musicians who have spent enough time in the same room to stop needing words for the important things. The question was, one more? The answer was, yes, something slower. Calvin nodded and shifted his grip on his brushes, and the tempo changed beneath her hands like a current reversing direction, and she felt the room shift with it. Bodies gravitating toward each other, and someone sighed audibly near the window, which was, she thought, about the best a musician could hope for. She was being watched. This was not unusual, she was always being watched, in this room and every room. But there was a quality to the watching tonight that she had noticed in the first set and had continued to notice in the way she continued to notice things she had not decided to examine. Somewhere in the back third of the room. Not the admiration she knew, not the ambition she knew, not the studied appreciation of people who had come to be seen being appreciative of something excellent. Something quieter. Something that felt, oddly, like being read. She did not look up to find the source of it. She had learned, early, that some things became larger when you looked at them directly. The set ended the way she had decided it would end, with a chord that resolved into a silence that lasted exactly 4 beats before the applause broke. She stood at the front of the bandstand and received it the way she received everything, with grace and with a certain precise generosity, Just enough warmth to feel like intimacy without being intimacy at all. The room loved her. Rooms always loved her. She gave them every reason to. She came down from the bandstand and Calvin said, "Good set," and she said, "Yes," and Rollins materialized at her elbow the way he always materialized at her elbow after a performance, smelling of cedar and calculation. "Good set," he said. "Calvin told me." Rollins did not smile at this. He had the expression he wore when there was something he had been thinking about and had decided to say, which was a particular compression of the lips that she had catalogued years ago and never told him about. "There's something I'd like to talk to you about," he said. "Not tonight." "When?" "Wednesday. Lunch." He said it with the care of a man laying down cards he wasn't entirely certain of. "There's a situation I think we should get ahead of." Estelle looked at him. She was very good at looking at people, the sustained, level regard that she developed partly because it was useful and partly because she had discovered early that most people could not hold it, and a person who cannot hold your gaze is a person who has revealed something. Rollins could hold it. He had known her long enough to have learned to. "Wednesday," she said. "Wednesday." She moved through the room after that in the way she always moved through rooms, with the slow deliberateness of a woman who has never been in a hurry in her life and never intends to start, pausing here for a word, there for a hand pressed briefly in both of hers, accepting a glass of something she drank half of and set on the nearest surface. She said the things she was supposed to say and listened to the things she was supposed to listen to and was, she knew, exactly what the room had come to see. She did not find the person who had been watching her from the back of the room. She told herself she had not looked. By 2 a.m, the party had thinned to its last faithful third, the ones who had nowhere else to be, which was to say, the ones Estelle liked best. She had made her rounds. She had performed the Estelle Beaumont that Harlem required and she had performed it well and she was, in the quiet place behind her eyes, tired in the particular way she was always tired after a good set, wrung out and restless at once, too alive to sleep and not alive enough to keep performing. She made her goodbyes. She was good at goodbyes. She was good at most of the social forms because she had understood early that they were a kind of music, structured, patterned, emotionally legible to everyone in the room, requiring nothing more of you than to play your part correctly. She let herself out through the kitchen, which was her habit, and walked the 2 blocks back to her apartment in the February cold with her coat pulled close and the sound of her own heels on the sidewalk for company. The apartment was quiet in the way it was always quiet when she came home, organized, dark except for the lamp she left on by the door, entirely her own. She had furnished it herself, piece by piece, each object chosen for what it was rather than what it signaled, and she stood in the doorway of the front room for a moment and looked at it the way she sometimes did after performances, reassuring herself of its realness. She crossed to the piano. It was not the upright of her childhood, it was a Steinway baby grand she had paid for herself and which lived in the center of her front room like an argument about what mattered. She sat down at it in her good dress without taking off her coat because it was cold and because sometimes the urgency of the thing arrived before practicality could catch up with it. She played 4 bars. Not the music she had played tonight, not anything she had played for any room. 4 bars of something that had been forming itself in her for 3 weeks, something that had no name yet and no audience, something that moved through a key she had not quite decided on and held there, unresolved, in a way that felt almost exactly like what she did not allow herself to feel in rooms where people were watching. She stopped. The silence came in. She sat with her hands in her lap and the lid still open over the keys and the lamp throwing its yellow circle against the far wall, and she thought about Wednesday. About Rollins and his compressed lips and the situation he wanted to get ahead of. About the particular quality of the watching she had felt tonight, from the back of the room, that curious, reading quality, like being translated into a language she hadn't known was being spoken. She closed the piano lid. She would find out on Wednesday what the situation was. She would manage it, as she managed everything, efficiently, without drama, with the calm precision she had developed over 31 years of being a black woman in rooms that had not necessarily expected her and had never, not once, been allowed to see that she had noticed. She was very good at managing things. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a while. In the morning, she did not think about the 4 bars she had played. She did not think about Rollins, or Wednesday, or the particular quality of being watched that she had not allowed herself to examine. She made coffee and dressed and went to rehearsal and conducted her musicians through a new arrangement with the calm authority that had made her reputation, and the morning passed into afternoon and the afternoon into evening, and Estelle Beaumont moved through it all with the precise and practiced grace of a woman who has made an art form of being seen without being known. The 4 bars stayed with her anyway. That was the trouble with the music that came from the place she did not usually let anyone see. It did not wait to be invited. It came when it chose, and then it stayed. Chapter 2: The Geography of Respectable Women. The train from Philadelphia left at 7:45 in the morning and Cecile Thibodeau was on it with 20 minutes to spare, which was unlike her. She was ordinarily a woman of exact arrivals, but she had woken at 4 and found that there was nothing left to do in the apartment that she had been doing since midnight, which was to say there was nothing left to check, recheck, fold, or decide about, and so she had simply left. The luggage was neat. She had seen to that. 3 cases, each packed with the particular care of a woman who has been trained by circumstance to make the outside of things presentable regardless of what was happening inside them. Her winter coat was pressed. Her notebook, the small brown one with the soft cover, which she had carried since graduate school and which was on its 3rd restitching, was in her handbag. She had her train ticket and the address in Harlem where Dorothea was staying and a letter of introduction from the editor at the Messenger that she did not think she would need but had brought anyway, because preparation was one of the things she knew how to do. She sat by the window and watched Philadelphia unspool itself and become countryside and became, for the duration of this, a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. She was 29 years old. She had been married for 7 years to a man named Fletcher Thibodeau, who was decent and conventional and not unkind, and she had left him 17 days ago in a manner that was as orderly as she could make it, which was to say that it was not orderly at all but had looked orderly from the outside, which was perhaps the same thing. She had not filed anything. She had not decided anything about the word divorce, which sat in the back of her mind like an object someone had left in a room and not yet come back for. She had only packed her cases and kissed Fletcher on the cheek. He had stood very still for it, the way a man stands when he does not know what gesture is called for but understands that something is ending, and taken the car to the station. She had not cried on the platform. She had not cried anywhere, yet, which she was aware was not the same as not needing to. She opened her notebook. She had been a poet since she was 19, or since before that, since she was 14 and filling composition books with things she did not have words for and trying to find the words anyway, which was what poetry was, she had come to understand. She had published 2 collections with a small press in Philadelphia and had work in the Crisis and the Messenger and had been called, in print, a voice of careful, luminous restraint, which had pleased her at the time and which she had been thinking about differently recently. The careful. The restraint. She was not certain anymore that these were compliments. She was not certain they were not. She looked at the open page. She wrote, Philadelphia. She considered this for a moment, then crossed it out. She wrote, what I am going toward. She crossed that out too. The countryside outside the window was gray and spare and February bare, every tree stripped to its argument. She had always liked February, which was a thing people found strange about her. Most people found February grim, but she had always thought there was something honest about a month that did not bother pretending. Everything visible. Nothing performing. She thought she might write that down, and then did not, because it felt uncomfortably close to something she did not want to look at too directly on a moving train. She thought about the poems she had published. The ones that had been praised for their luminous restraint. She thought about what they were about, the surface of them, longing, loss, the texture of time passing, the particular grief of things that had not happened and perhaps would not. She had written these poems and believed, or had seemed to believe, that they were about the general condition of longing, addressed to the air, to the reader, to the abstract space where poetry lives when it is not yet about anything specific. She thought, now, on the train, for not the first time in the last 17 days, about whether this had been true. She did not follow the thought to its end. There was a great deal of space between Philadelphia and New York and she was only halfway through it. She wrote, I am going to New York. Then, below it, smaller, I am going because I could not stay. She did not cross this one out. Penn Station arrived with the great organized noise of itself, the marble and the arched windows and the particular roar of a building that has spent decades metabolizing human urgency, and Cecile gathered her cases and her composure in equal measure and walked out into it. She was looking for Dorothea, who had said she would be by the 7th Avenue entrance at 9:30, which it now was. Dorothea was not by the 7th Avenue entrance. Dorothea was in the middle of the floor, holding a sign that read Thibodeau in letters large enough to be legible from the street, wearing a coat the color of a well-ripened tomato, and talking to a man with a trumpet case who appeared to be trying to lead the conversation and not quite managing it. Cecile had known Dorothea Voss for 11 years, which was long enough to have ceased being surprised by her, although the coat was impressive even by Dorothea's standards. "You're on time," Dorothea said, releasing the trumpet man with a nod that was either a farewell or a promissory note. She looked at Cecile the way she always looked at her, with the particular attention of someone who is reading you rather than looking at you, which Cecile had found intrusive for approximately the first 6 months of their friendship and had since come to rely on. "You look terrible." "Thank you. I mean it constructively." Dorothea kissed her cheek and took the heaviest case without asking. "Did you sleep?" "On the train." "That's not sleep, that's a temporary arrangement with unconsciousness." She began moving toward the exit with the confidence of a woman who has long since decided that the city is obligated to get out of her way. "Are you hungry?" "I don't know." "That means yes." "Come on." They had breakfast at a counter on 7th Avenue that smelled like coffee and bacon grease and the particular warmth of a room that has been heated by human proximity since before dawn. Dorothea ordered for both of them, which she did whenever she sensed that Cecile had used up her decision-making on things that had required more of it. Cecile ate and let the city arrive around her in pieces, the sound of it, the scale of it, the fact of Harlem outside the windows, already different from Philadelphia in the particular way that made her feel, simultaneously, more visible and more free. "So," Dorothea said, when the plates were half cleared. "Tell me." "I told you in the letters." "Your letters are very composed." "Tell me the part you left out of the composed version." Cecile looked at her coffee. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "I don't mean New York. I mean in general. I feel like there's a sentence I've been writing for years and I've just noticed that I've been writing it in the wrong language and I don't know what the right language is." Dorothea nodded as though this was exactly what she had expected to hear. "Is this about Fletcher?" Not only." Cecile looked up. "Fletcher wasn't unkind. It wasn't cruelty. It was just wrong. All of it. The whole shape of it. And the thing is I knew it was wrong, I think I've always known it was wrong, but I kept adjusting myself to fit it instead of asking why it didn't fit, and now I'm 30 years old and I've spent 4 years of my life and I don't know what I was." She stopped. "I'm sorry. This isn't useful." "It's extremely useful," Dorothea said. "Keep going." Cecile shook her head. "I don't have more than that. That's all I know. The shape was wrong and I couldn't make it right and now I'm here." Dorothea was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough that Cecile noticed. She was stirring her coffee without drinking it, which meant she was thinking about whether to say the true thing or the kind thing. "You've been writing poems about longing your whole life," Dorothea said, "and you've never once asked yourself who they were for." Cecile looked at her. "I mean that seriously," Dorothea said. "Not as a literary observation. Your poems are extraordinary, Cecile. They are also very carefully addressed to no one in particular. And I have read enough of them for long enough to wonder, as a friend, as someone who loves you, whether there is a particular that you've been keeping vague deliberately. Without knowing you were doing it." The coffee counter was very loud around them and very warm. Cecile was aware of all of it in the peripheral way you are aware of things when something closer has your full attention. "That's a very large inference," she said. "Yes," Dorothea agreed. "I've been sitting on it for about 2 years." Cecile said nothing. She picked up her coffee and drank it and set it down very carefully, as though the cup were a thing that required precise handling. "I'm not saying I know anything," Dorothea said, more gently. "I'm saying I've wondered. And I think you should wonder too." I think that's maybe part of why the shape felt wrong. Dorothea. I'm done, Dorothea said. That's all I wanted to say. Now, do you want to hear about the apartment, or do you want me to arrange your cases first? Cecile looked at her for a moment. The apartment, she said. Dorothea told her about the apartment, which was a third-floor flat on 133rd Street with good light and a radiator that clanked but worked, and a landlady named Mrs. Fontaine who had strong opinions about the hours at which the front door should be used and would tell Cecile about them in detail at their first meeting and at several subsequent ones. Dorothea had sublet it from a friend who had gone to Paris for the winter, which sounded glamorous, and would be available until April, which was enough time for Cecile to figure out something more permanent if she decided to stay. If, Cecile said. I said what I said. The apartment, when they reached it, was small and had the particular provisional quality of a space that has been lived in by someone else and not yet made into anything. The furniture was not bad. The windows were good. There was a writing table by the largest one, which Cecile stood in front of and looked out at 133rd Street, the women crossing with their shopping, a man in a good hat reading something, the particular unhurried purposefulness of a neighborhood that has decided what it is and is committed to it. Well? Dorothea asked, from the doorway. It's good, Cecile said. The light is good. Writers, Dorothea said, not unkindly. Cecile stayed by the window after Dorothea left. She unpacked in the careful, methodical way she did everything, clothes first, then books, then the small objects she had brought that were hers without being Fletcher's, a photograph of her mother, a particular teacup, a ceramic inkwell she had bought herself 10 years ago because she had liked the color of it. She arranged these in their places and then stood in the middle of the room that was not yet hers and looked at the writing table. She sat down at it. She opened her notebook to the page she had written on the train. I am going to New York. I am going because I could not stay. She looked at these two sentences for a long time. Then she turned to the next page and uncapped her pen and held it over the blankness. She thought about what Dorothea had said. She thought about the poems she had written, the ones praised for their careful, luminous restraint, and she tried, honestly, to ask herself whether there had been a particular. Whether she had been writing to someone and calling it no one. She found that she could not look at this directly. Not yet. She wrote, instead, What Harlem Does to a Woman at Midnight. She read this back. Then, for the first time in 17 days, she laughed, a small, surprised sound, hardly anything, but real. She was here, then. Whatever that meant. She was in Harlem with her cases unpacked and a writing table with good light and Dorothea's voice still ringing in the room like a tuning fork, and she did not know what she was going toward or who she was going toward it as, but she was here. That was, she supposed, a beginning. Chapter 3, What Harlem Does to a Woman at Midnight. She had been in the apartment for 5 days before Dorothea decided she had been in the apartment for long enough. You're nesting, Dorothea said, appearing at the door on Thursday evening without having announced herself, which was her custom. She looked at the books Cecile had arranged on the windowsill and the draft pages on the writing table and the half-drunk cup of tea gone cold by the inkwell. You've been in here since Monday organizing your pencils by length. That's an exaggeration. Is it? Cecile looked at the pencils. She did not answer. There's a rent party tonight, Dorothea said. On 136th Street. Someone named James Whitfield, who is a pianist and a very good cook, and whose parties are the best parties in Harlem, according to everyone who has been to a party in Harlem. You are coming. I'm working. You're staring at paper. Dorothea crossed the room and picked up the draft page on the writing table, read the 3 lines on it, and set it down with the expression of someone who has confirmed a diagnosis. Cecile. You cannot write about being alive if you are not being alive. Get your coat. Cecile went to get her coat. This was, she thought, putting it on, the good wool one, the dark blue, which was both warm and presentable, which was the combination she most valued in a coat, a pattern that had characterized her friendship with Dorothea since they were 19. Dorothea arrived. Dorothea assessed. Dorothea determined what needed to happen. Cecile, who was perfectly capable of determining what needed to happen herself but found that Dorothea's determination was usually correct and always faster, followed. It had led her, over the years, to a reading in Baltimore that had changed how she thought about her own work, to a friendship with an editor at the Crisis who had published her best poems, and to Fletcher, whom Dorothea had introduced her to at a dinner party in 1922 and who had been handsome and steady and had laughed at the right things. Dorothea had not, at the time, expressed any reservations about this, which Cecile had recently wondered about. She had not asked. The night was cold and bright, February doing its February work, and 135th Street was alive in the way Harlem streets were alive after dark, particular, purposeful, not at all like Philadelphia at this hour, which would have been quiet and somewhat concerned about itself. Here there were people in good coats moving with the unhurried intention of people who know where they are going and have decided it will be worth the cold. The brownstone they stopped in front of had light coming from every window and something coming from inside it that Cecile felt before she could hear it, a low, warm vibration, like the building was breathing. "Ready?" Dorothea said. Cecile was aware that this was a formality. She said yes. Inside was everything. That was the only accurate description. Inside was a press of people and the smell of food from somewhere and voices stacked on top of each other and above all of it, threaded through all of it, the sound of a piano. Cecile stopped just inside the door. She was accustomed to music. She had grown up with it, her mother had played, her father had sung, she had attended performances in Philadelphia and New York and once in Boston with Fletcher, who had sat beside her with the contained, respectful appreciation of a man who was glad to be the kind of person who attended concerts. She had written about music, had used it as a subject and a metaphor, had understood it well enough to be useful to her on the page. She had not known, until this moment, that there was a kind she had not yet heard. The piano was against the far wall and the woman playing it was. Cecile's mind did not immediately produce the right word. Extraordinary was the word that arrived first, which was not wrong but was insufficient. The woman was tall, with close-cropped hair and the posture of someone who has made a decision about how to occupy space and stands by it, and she was playing in a way that made the room around her seem like it existed to contain what she was doing rather than the other way around. Her hands moved without urgency. Her face was the face of someone who is not performing but simply being, in the most complete possible use of that word, and the distinction between those two things was, in this moment, the most important thing Cecile had ever noticed. She noticed other things, too, cataloguing the way she always catalogued, the naturalist's reflex she had never been able to stop even when she wanted to. The ink stain at the side of the woman's right palm. The particular set of her shoulders, authority, yes, but not aggression, something more like certainty, like a woman who has known for a long time exactly what she is. The way the room was not watching her the way rooms watch performers but the way rooms watch something that has made them forget to watch. Cecile found a place against the wall and stayed there. Dorothea was saying something beside her. Cecile did not hear it. She was watching the woman play and she was aware that this was a quality of attention she could not immediately account for. Not the poet's cataloguing, not the critic's assessment, but something more like what happened in her chest at certain moments of great beauty, which was a kind of organized falling, a rearrangement of things that had seemed fixed. She took out her notebook. This was automatic, the gesture that happened before the thinking did. Her pen was already in her hand. She looked down at the page. She could not write a word. This was not, in her experience, how it worked. She had written in the margins of programs during concerts that moved her, had written in taxicabs and church pews and once at the side of a hospital bed, had written in every condition of emotion she had encountered. She had never sat before a blank page and found the machinery simply absent, as if whatever the mechanism was had stopped mid-stroke. She looked back at the woman at the piano. The woman had not looked at her. There were 30, 40 people in this room and this woman at the center of it was not looking at anyone in particular, or was looking at everyone in the way musicians sometimes look at a room, not seeing faces but receiving something, some atmospheric condition that the room was collectively producing. Cecile stayed against the wall for 2 full sets. She was aware, at some point, that Dorothea had moved away and found people to talk to, because Dorothea found people to talk to the way water found lower ground, without effort, without decision, as a simple consequence of her nature. Cecile stayed where she was. The music changed. It had been structured, controlled, and then it shifted, a moment in the second set when the pianist departed from whatever she had planned and went somewhere else, following some internal imperative, and the departure lasted only a few bars before she returned to the shape of the piece. But those bars were, Cecile's mind searched for language and found, for the first time in a long time, that language was not adequate. Those bars were the sound of something revealing itself. Not to the room. To itself. Cecile did not realize she had pressed her hand flat against the wall behind her until she felt the plaster cold against her palm. She had meant to stay for the whole set. She became aware, mid-thought, that this was not going to be possible, not because it was unpleasant, but because it was the opposite of unpleasant and she did not know what to do with that, and the not knowing felt dangerous in the way that only true things feel dangerous, which is the danger of being changed by something before you have decided to be changed. She found Dorothea. "I have to go," she said. Dorothea looked at her with the particular assessment that meant she had noticed something and was deciding whether to say it. "Are you all right?" "Yes." Yes." She looked back, once, at the woman at the piano. "Who is she?" "Estelle Beaumont." Dorothea said it with the tone of someone naming something she thought Cecile should have already known. "She leads the house band at the Cotton Club some nights. Does her own shows at the Savoy. Rollins handles her bookings, you know Rollins? Big man, gold watch." She paused. "Why?" "She's extraordinary." Dorothea looked at her in the way that meant she was filing something. "Yes," she said. "She is." Cecile said goodbye and retrieved her coat from the pile by the door and went out into the February cold, which felt, after the heat of the room, like something requiring adjustment. She walked the 3 blocks to 133rd Street with her notebook open and her pen in her hand, ready, and she did not write anything until she was almost at her door, and then she wrote one line. She stood on the sidewalk and read it back in the light from the street lamp. "I am watching someone be entirely themselves and I am in ruins." She looked at this for a moment. Then she went inside, and up the stairs, and into the apartment that still did not quite feel like hers, and she sat at the writing table and put the notebook face down on the desk without reading the line again and sat there for a while in the good February dark, thinking about the particular quality of being changed by something before you have decided to be changed. She did not examine the line. She knew herself well enough to know that there were things that needed to sit before they could be looked at. She also knew, this was the part she had not yet admitted, not to Dorothea, not to the page, that the sitting had been going on for a long time. That there was a quality of familiar strangeness to what had happened in that room tonight, as if she had stumbled into a country she had never visited and recognized the language. She thought about Dorothea's words on the first day. "You've been writing poems about longing your whole life and you've never once asked yourself who they were for." She had dismissed it. She had called it a large inference. She thought about the woman at the piano, the ink stain at the side of her right palm, the sound of those few bars when the music had briefly, incompletely, shown its own interior. She thought, "I don't know what this is." And then, more quietly, underneath that, "I think I have been not knowing what this is for a very long time." She did not sleep for a while. She did not look at the line in her notebook. In the morning, she looked. "I am watching someone be entirely themselves and I am in ruins." She read it once. Then she closed the notebook and put it in her handbag and went to make coffee, and she was very careful, for the rest of the morning, not to think about what she had meant by it. She was not entirely successful. On the other side of Harlem, the same night, though Cecile did not know this and would not for some time, Estelle Beaumont walked home through the cold and sat down at her Steinway and played 4 bars of the composition that had no name yet, and stopped, and sat with her hands in her lap in the lamplit silence, and thought about the quality of attention she had felt from the back of the room tonight. She had looked up once. Just before the last song. She had looked up and seen a woman, slight, in a dark wool coat, standing against the wall with a notebook open and a pen in her hand and an expression that Estelle did not have a word for. Not the expressions she knew. Not admiration, not ambition, not the studied appreciation of rooms that had come to see her. Something more careful than any of those. Something more like, she searched for the word and arrived at the one that surprised her. Translation. As if whatever Estelle was doing at the piano was being quietly, carefully translated into something else by the woman against the wall. She had looked away before the woman could notice her looking. She was not entirely certain she had looked away in time. She closed the piano lid and went to bed and told herself, efficiently, that it was nothing, that rooms were full of people and she noticed people and this was no different, and she was mostly convinced by the time she slept. The 4 bars stayed with her. They always did. Chapter 4, A Practical Solution for Practical Women. The restaurant Rollins had chosen was on Lenox Avenue and was the kind of place that served its purpose without drawing attention to itself: good food, good linen, the sort of discretion that cost money and was worth it. Estelle had been here before. Rollins chose it whenever he had something to say that he did not want the room to overhear, which told her, before she had sat down, roughly how serious this was. He was already there when she arrived, which was unusual. Rollins was ordinarily a man who timed his arrivals to land slightly after the person he was meeting, which gave him the advantage of assessing a room before committing himself to it. The fact that he was seated and had already ordered coffee told her he had been thinking about this longer than Wednesday. She sat down. "You ordered," she said. "I was early." He did not explain why, which told her everything about why. The waiter came. She ordered without looking at the menu. She knew this restaurant, and when the waiter had gone she settled back in her chair and looked at Rollins with the patient, level attention that she gave to things she intended to understand completely before she responded to them. "Tell me about the situation," she said. Rollins wrapped both hands around his coffee cup in the manner of a man gathering something before he set it down. "Miriam Lott," he said. Estelle said nothing. She was at the Savoy last Thursday. She was at the benefit at the Astor the week before. I've had 3 conversations in the past month, Estelle. 3 separate people, none of whom know each other, all of whom have been talking to Miriam, and the conversations have been about the same subject." "Which subject?" Rollins met her eyes. He had known her long enough to not soften things unnecessarily. "The question of why a woman of your position and visibility has no attachment. No one she is attached to, publicly. No one who appears at her elbow at events and is recognized as belonging there." The word he had not said sat between them like a piece of furniture. "There have always been questions," Estelle said. "Rooms talk." "Rooms have always talked," Rollins agreed. "The difference is that Miriam Lott is currently the room. She was at the Astor and she said something, I don't know the exact words, someone paraphrased it for me, about how remarkable it was, a woman of your talent and success, apparently uninterested in the things that women of talent and success generally arrange for themselves. And she said it warmly, Estelle. That's the thing about Miriam. She always says it warmly." Estelle looked at him steadily. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we address it. Proactively." He set down the coffee cup. "There is a particular kind of story that, once it starts being told, is very difficult to untell. Especially in a city this size, in rooms this small. I've been doing what I do for 16 years and I have watched careers, good careers, real careers, become the thing that people talk about instead of the work. That is not going to happen to you. You're suggesting a companion," Estelle said. "Someone whose presence makes the story go away. Someone whose presence makes the story not get written in the first place." She looked at him for a long moment. "This is a thing we are going to discuss over lunch." "We are going to discuss it over an excellent duck," Rollins said, with the calm of a man who has rehearsed this conversation and knows where all the exits are. "And I would like you to consider it seriously before you tell me it's unnecessary." The duck arrived. Estelle ate with the deliberateness she applied to everything, unhurried, efficient, making no gesture she had not decided to make. She had spent 31 years developing this quality of stillness and it served her now, as it served her in performance, as a way of holding space without filling it, of making a room wait without appearing to make anyone wait. She thought about Miriam Lott. She thought about 16 years of Rollins's career, which was really a record of 16 years of watching what happened to people who did not manage their stories. She thought about the 4 bars on her piano that had no name yet. "Who did you have in mind?" she said. "A poet." Rollins said this as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Cecile Thibodeau. She arrived in Harlem about a week ago, came up from Philadelphia. She's published 2 collections, has work in the crisis, well regarded in the literary scene here. Dorothea Voss is her friend. You know Dorothea?" "Slightly. Mrs. Thibodeau is separated from her husband. She has her own reasons to want a reason to stay in New York rather than go back to Philadelphia. Her presence at your side reads as companionship. Artistic circles. 2 professional women with interests in common. It is not," he said carefully, "an unusual thing." Estelle set down her fork. "You've already spoken to her." "I've spoken to Dorothea." "Who has spoken to her?" "Who has agreed, tentatively, to meet with you before committing to anything." He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I wanted to raise it with you first." "You raised it with Dorothea first." "I raised it with the intermediary first." Which is the correct order of operations when the parties involved are both, when both parties are the kind of people who prefer to have a moment to think before they are asked to perform. Estelle considered this. It was, she supposed, accurate. She did prefer a moment to think. The irritation she felt at having been managed was blunted by the recognition that she was being managed well, which was why she continued to employ Rollins. "What are the terms?" she said. 6 weeks. Public appearances, dinners, performances, events. Her name alongside yours in the society columns. A shared presence in the rooms that matter. He poured more coffee without asking, which she allowed. At the end of 6 weeks, the arrangement concludes. You've demonstrated the requisite social architecture. Miriam Lott finds another subject. The story doesn't get told. And what does she want? She wants to stay in New York. Rollins was quiet for a moment. I think she also needs a reason to not go back to being who she was. But that's not the arrangement. That's just context. Estelle looked at the window. The street outside was doing its midday things, people, coats, the particular urgency of a city that does not stop for lunch regardless of what anyone has to discuss over duck. She thought, 6 weeks. She thought, managed, contained, finite. She thought about Miriam Lott saying remarkable in a warm voice at the Astor and what exactly remarkable meant when Miriam Lott said it. Arrange the meeting, she said. Rollins allowed himself what, for Rollins, constituted relief, a slight relaxation around the eyes, nothing so uncontrolled as an exhale. Tea room on Lenox. Tomorrow, if you're available. I'm available. She picked up her fork again. Rollins, she said. Yes. If this woman is difficult, the arrangement ends immediately. Understood. And if Miriam Lott brings it up regardless of anything, the arrangement, or anything else, I expect you to be in the room. I will be in every room you want me in. She looked at him. That's what you said 4 years ago and I believed you then too. He smiled, which he did rarely and always briefly. I've been mostly right. You've been mostly right, she agreed, and finished her lunch. The tea room was on Lenox Avenue and it was, like the lunch restaurant, the kind of place that knew its purpose, small tables, good light, the particular quiet of a room in which voices did not carry unless they intended to. Estelle arrived at 2:15 and was seated and had ordered before the door opened again. She watched Cecile Thibodeau come in. She recognized her. Not from meeting her, they had not met, but from the rent party on 136th Street, from the quality of attention she had felt from the back of the room and had later decided to stop thinking about. The dark wool coat. The slight figure, the careful way of moving, the notebook visible at the top of the handbag as if it had escaped without her noticing. The expression that was composed in the way that composed things are when composition requires effort. Cecile saw her. Something moved in her face, a very small adjustment, quickly contained, and she crossed the room. Miss Beaumont, she said. Mrs. Thibodeau, Estelle said. Please sit down. She sat. She did not reach for the notebook, which was the first thing Estelle noticed, because most people who carried notebooks reached for them when they were uncertain, and Cecile Thibodeau was almost certainly uncertain but had decided against the reaching, which was interesting. They ordered. The tea arrived. They were, Estelle could see, both being very precise. I understand, Cecile said, that Mr. Rollins has explained the general outline. He has. Estelle looked at her steadily. I would rather hear, from you directly, what you understand it to be. Cecile looked back at her without looking away. Her eyes were dark and careful, and they held Estelle's with more ease than most people managed. A public companionship, she said. Shared appearances, dinners, performances, events. I appear at your side in the rooms that have been paying attention to who does and does not appear there. You appear, by extension, to have the social arrangements that those rooms consider appropriate. The story that is currently being assembled by Miriam Lott does not get assembled. She paused. That's what I understand it to be. And what do you want from it? Cecile's hands were on the table, still, around her teacup. She looked at them briefly, then back up. Time, she said. I need a reason to be in New York that makes sense to the people who would like me to return to Philadelphia. Being seen as the companion of someone in your position, in your world, that is a reason they will accept. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not ready to go back yet. I may not go back at all. But I need to be here long enough to understand which of those is true. Estelle considered her. This was the most honest thing she had heard anyone say to her in a professional negotiation in some time, and it adjusted her assessment of Cecile Thibodeau by several degrees. How long? Cecile asked. 6 weeks. Something moved in Cecile's face, relief, or perhaps the relaxation of a tension she had been holding without realizing. 6 weeks, she said. All right. There are things I should be clear about, Estelle said. I control my schedule. If I tell you to be somewhere, I expect you to be there. If I tell you something is not a matter for discussion, it is not a matter for discussion. She held Cecile's gaze. This arrangement serves both of us. It does not give either of us access to the other's private life. You will be in my public world for 6 weeks. That is the whole of it. I understand, Cecile said. Good. A pause. Around them, the tea room went about its business. May I ask you something? Cecile said. Estelle raised an eyebrow. Proceed. I was at a rent party last week. On 136th Street. She said it simply, not as an overture, just as information. I heard you play. Estelle was very still for a moment. I know, she said. I saw you. Something crossed Cecile's face. She had not expected this. You didn't look up. I looked up once, Estelle said. Near the end. Cecile said nothing. She was doing the thing Estelle had noticed from the stage, that quality of attentive stillness, as if the rest of her had gone quiet to let one sense work. It was very good, Cecile said finally. What you played. I couldn't write a word. Estelle looked at her. You had your notebook. I know. It didn't help. She said it plainly, without embellishment, and Estelle recognized the quality of the statement, the kind of honesty that has not decided yet whether it is a vulnerability. She reached across the table and offered her hand. 6 weeks, she said. Cecile looked at her hand, then took it. Her grip was firm and brief, and she met Estelle's eyes over the handshake with that same quality of ease that was slightly more ease than Estelle had accounted for. 6 weeks, Cecile agreed. Neither of them held on a beat too long. They were both very careful about that. That evening, in her apartment, Cecile sat at the writing table and opened her notebook and did not write anything for 20 minutes. Then she wrote, "She saw me." She looked up once and saw me, and she didn't say anything about it until I brought it up myself, and then she said it like it was a fact and not a thing she had been keeping. She read this back. Then she wrote, smaller, below it, "I don't know what to do with any of this." She closed the notebook. In her own apartment, 2 streets over, Estelle sat at the Steinway and played the 4 bars again. They were the same 4 bars, mostly, but something had shifted since last week, some increment of resolution, some movement toward a shape she could not yet see clearly. She played them again. She did not know yet what they were about. She had an inkling. She was not yet ready to follow the inkling to its end. She closed the lid. She went to bed. She thought, before she slept, that the woman had said I couldn't write a word with the particular tone of someone reporting a thing they found both troubling and significant, and she thought that this was either something to file carefully away or something to stop thinking about entirely, and she had not yet decided which. She would, she told herself, decide tomorrow. She suspected she would not. Chapter 5, The Things We Agree Not to Notice. Cecile told Dorothea the next morning. She did it deliberately, which was to say she waited until Dorothea had coffee and had sat down, because Dorothea without coffee was a liability and Dorothea standing up was a rhetorical force that was difficult to interrupt. She gave her the full account, Rollins, the tea room, the 6 weeks, the terms, and she delivered it in the careful, factual manner she used when she wanted to demonstrate that she had thought a thing through and did not require processing aloud, which was always the manner most likely to produce the opposite effect. Dorothea listened. This was, in itself, notable. When Cecile finished, Dorothea held her coffee cup in both hands and looked at her with one eyebrow raised in the way that meant she was deciding between the true thing and the kind thing and had not yet landed. 6 weeks, Dorothea said. 6 weeks. As the public companion of Estelle Beaumont. Yes. At dinners and performances and, I assume Miriam Lott's evenings, things of that kind. Among others. Dorothea looked at her coffee. Then she looked back up. This is very sensible, she said. Cecile blinked. You think so? It gives you time. It gives you cover from Philadelphia. It puts you in the right rooms with the right people. Dorothea said this in the tone of someone listing the obvious. It's a practical arrangement between 2 practical women. I don't see why you look like you're waiting for me to argue with you. Because you usually argue with me. I argue with you when you're being foolish. This is not foolish, it's organized. Dorothea drank her coffee. I do have one observation. Of course you do. I introduced you to Fletcher in 1922, Dorothea said. And I did not say, at that time, what I perhaps should have said, which was that I was not certain you were marrying him for any reason that would serve you in the long term. I should have said it. I chose not to. She was quiet for a moment. I am not going to make the same decision twice. Cecile looked at her carefully. What are you not saying? I'm saying, 6 weeks is 6 weeks, and an arrangement is an arrangement. I'm also saying that you sat against that wall last week with your pen in your hand and couldn't write a single word, and you are a woman who has written in the margins of her own heartbreak for 30 years. She set down the cup. I'm not saying anything specific. I'm only saying, notice what you notice. Don't tidy it away before you've looked at it. Cecile considered arguing. She had several arguments ready. She did not use them. All right, she said. Dorothea nodded. Good. Now, what are you wearing to the first dinner? The first dinner was on Friday, which gave Cecile 3 days to think about it and 4.5 days to wish she had thought about something else. She wore the dark green dress, the one with the silk collar, because it was what she had and because the alternative, buying something specifically for the occasion, felt like a commitment she was not yet ready to make. She arrived at the restaurant at the agreed time and found Estelle already there, which she was beginning to suspect was simply how Estelle was, always present before the room had finished arranging itself around her, always the fixed point that the rest of the evening organized itself in relation to. She was wearing garnet, which was a color that should have been theatrical and was instead simply correct, the way Estelle's choices always seemed simply correct. She looked up when Cecile came in. You're on time, she said. I was going to be early, Cecile said, sitting, but I thought that might be alarming. Something moved in Estelle's face, the brief, arrived before she stopped at expression that Cecile had not yet learned to recognize but would come to understand was the laugh she couldn't manage to suppress. It was gone in an instant. But it had been there. It would not have been alarming, Estelle said. It would have been efficient. I'll remember that for next time. This dinner was not the whole of the strategy. Rollins had explained that what mattered was consistency, repetition, being seen together in the right rooms often enough that their association became an established fact rather than a notable occurrence. But it was the first, which meant it was the one that would be noticed as the first, and Cecile was aware of this the way you are aware of the first line of a poem, as the thing that will determine what can come after it. The room was the right kind of room. Not ostentatious, but attended, the sort of dinner where editors and musicians and the particular category of Harlem society that overlapped both were likely to be, and were. Cecile knew 3 people at nearby tables. She could see, from the way people noticed their arrival, that at least 2 of those people would be mentioning it tomorrow. Estelle was, in this environment, extraordinary. There was no other word for it. She spoke to the room's existing inhabitants with the ease of someone who has long since earned the right to be wherever she is, and the room responded in kind, coming to her slightly, orienting toward her in the way that rooms orient toward things they have recognized as important without quite knowing why. Cecile, seated across from her, watched this and felt a complicated satisfaction, like an astronomer who has predicted a comet and is watching it arrive precisely on schedule. "You're cataloging me," Estelle said. Cecile looked up. Estelle was watching her with the steady, measuring gaze that she had felt from across a tea room 2 days ago. "I catalog everyone," Cecile said. "It's a professional failing." "Is it a failing?" "My editors have occasionally found it useful. My husband found it unsettling." She said this without drama, as a fact, and watched Estelle receive it. "Former husband," Estelle said. "Former husband," Cecile agreed. "And, less former than it feels, technically. We have not, the word is still unresolved. The word. Divorce." She said it plainly, without the flinch she would have produced in Philadelphia. "I am not ready for that conversation and he is not yet ready to have it. So we are in the middle of something that has no name yet." Estelle was quiet for a moment. "I understand that," she said. "Having something in the middle that has no name." It was an odd thing to say, and Cecile almost asked her what she meant, and then decided, correctly, that this was the kind of statement that closes rather than opens, that was offered as acknowledgement and not as invitation. "Yes," she said. "I imagine you do." They talked. This was the part that surprised her, afterward, that they talked, and that it did not feel like performance, or not only like performance. They talked about the literary scene and about music and about the crisis and about Harlem, which Cecile was still assembling for herself and which Estelle had an intimate, proprietary knowledge of, not the knowledge of possession but the knowledge of someone who has made a place her own through years of inhabiting it precisely. A woman stopped at their table. She was handsome and wore an excellent hat and her smile was the warmest possible instrument for the most pointed possible purpose. "Estelle," she said. "What a pleasure." "Miriam." Estelle's tone was the temperature of a very pleasant afternoon, neither warm nor cool, simply correct. "You know Cecile Thibodeau?" "The poet." Miriam Lott turned to Cecile with the full force of her attention, which was considerable. "Of course. I've read your work in the crisis. That piece last fall, the one about what February costs, I thought of it for weeks." She said it with such genuine-sounding warmth that Cecile, who had been prepared for something strategic, found herself briefly disarmed. "Thank you," Cecile said. "Are you in Harlem for long?" Miriam asked. "For the foreseeable," Cecile said. She felt Estelle not react beside her, which was a specific quality of stillness she was beginning to catalogue. "How wonderful." Miriam's gaze moved between them with the pleasantness of a woman taking a reading. "You must come to my Thursday evening. Both of you, next week, if you're free." "We would be delighted," Estelle said, in a tone that meant she had accounted for this. Miriam said her warmest goodbyes and moved on. Cecile picked up her water glass. "She's very good," she said quietly. "Yes," Estelle agreed. "Don't underestimate her." "I never underestimate someone who read a poem of mine from months ago and quoted it to me without notes." Estelle looked at her. You noticed. I notice things, Cecile said. I told you it was a professional failing. After dinner, they stood briefly on the sidewalk in the February cold while Estelle's car was brought around. She had a car, which Cecile had not expected and then immediately felt that she should have, and Cecile pulled her coat close and looked up at the sky, which was doing nothing in particular, and felt the strangeness of the evening settling over her. Not unpleasantly. Strangely. You did well tonight, Estelle said. Cecile looked at her. Did I? You were seen without being watched. That's a distinction that matters in these rooms. Cecile considered this. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. But something in Estelle's voice had shifted by a fraction of a degree, the barest warmth, given and immediately organized back into composure. I'll send word about Miriam Lott's Thursday. The car arrived. Estelle got in. The door closed. Cecile walked home. She was 3 blocks from her apartment when she realized she was smiling and could not account for it precisely, which was the kind of thing she would normally have written in her notebook on the spot. She did not reach for the notebook. She let the unexamined thing remain unexamined. She was getting better at that, she thought. Or worse, depending on how you measured it. Across the river of Harlem that ran between their 2 apartments, 2 streets, a handful of blocks, nothing. Estelle sat in the back of her car and looked out the window at the city moving past and did not let herself think about the dinner, specifically, but thought instead about the quality of the conversation, which had been efficient. Yes. Efficient and useful and conducted by 2 professional women with something to gain from a professional arrangement, which was exactly what it had been. She thought about the way Cecile had looked at Miriam Lott after the woman had quoted her poem. Not flattered. Analytical. She's very good. As if she had been watching and taking notes the whole time. She thought, I'm going to have to be careful. Then she thought, very briefly and very quickly, about the 4 bars on her piano, and about the quality of attention she had first felt from the back of a room on 136th Street, and about a woman sitting against a wall with a notebook open and a pen in her hand and an expression that was nothing like any expression she had catalogued before. She stopped that thought before it went further. She was, she told herself, very good at stopping thoughts. The car pulled up to her building. She went inside. She did not play the piano. She went directly to bed and she lay in the dark and listened to the city outside her window, which was always doing something, and she said to herself, 6 weeks. A professional arrangement. Finite, managed, and useful. She believed this, mostly. Mostly was enough, for now. Estelle had told Auguste about the arrangement on Tuesday. She had called it that, the arrangement, precisely once, after which Auguste had begun calling it the arrangement with a capital letter she could hear in his voice, which was aggravating. He arrived at her apartment on Saturday morning unannounced, which he alone among everyone she knew was permitted to do, and she let him in and poured him coffee and waited. So, he said, settling onto her sofa with the ease of someone who has been comfortable in this room his entire life, which he had. Tell me about the arrangement. It's an arrangement. Lowercase. Tell me about the arrangement. She told him. She gave him the same facts she had given herself, practical, professional, 6 weeks, managed. Auguste listened with his coffee and his face that was too much like her own face for her to perform it successfully, which was the problem with Auguste, and always had been. What's she like, he said, when she finished. Competent. Private. She was a poet before she was a social asset, which is probably going to be more useful than Rollins realizes. That's not what I asked. Estelle looked at him. Auguste smiled in the particular way he had, which was the smile of a man who has filed something away and intends to return to it at the least convenient moment. I'm asking what she's like. As a person. The person you're going to be spending 6 weeks with. She catalogues people. She's precise about language. She doesn't reach for her notebook when she's uncertain, which I expected her to do. She stopped. That's what she's like. Auguste nodded slowly. You noticed what she does with her notebook. I notice things. Sure. He drank his coffee. Is she pretty? August. I'm asking as a concerned brother. You're asking because you're constitutionally unable to leave a situation alone. Both things can be true. He looked at her over the rim of his cup, with the watchful eyes that were her eyes, except that August's watchfulness had none of her caution in it. Stell. You know I support you in everything. I know. And you know I would never ask you to explain yourself about anything that's private. I know that too. So I'll just say, 6 weeks is 6 weeks, and an arrangement is an arrangement. He set down his cup. And I've never once, in your whole life, seen you notice what someone does with their hands. The room was quiet. Estelle said, it's an arrangement. August said, absolutely. He stood, kissed her cheek, and found his coat. Tell Cecile I hope to meet her soon. She sounds like someone I'd like. He let himself out. Estelle sat for a moment in the kitchen with her coffee and the residue of the conversation and the particular irritation of being known by someone who loves you too well to be deceived. Then she went to the piano. She played the 4 bars. They were different again. Still 4 bars, still the same key, but there was something in them now that hadn't been there before, some quality of opening, the musical equivalent of a door standing slightly ajar. She played them twice more. Then she opened her composition book and wrote down the notes, all 4 bars, for the first time. She looked at what she'd written. She had not titled it yet. She did not title it. But she wrote it down, which meant she had decided it was going somewhere. That was, she thought, a beginning. The first photograph appeared in the society pages the following Wednesday, the two of them at the Friday dinner, Cecile's profile turned slightly toward Estelle, Estelle looking at the room with her habitual composure. The caption read, Miss Estelle Beaumont with Miss Cecile Thibodeau, poet, at dinner on Lenox Avenue. Cecile read it over her morning coffee and felt something she did not immediately categorize. Then she tore it out and put it in her notebook, not the writing pages, but the back flap, the pockets she used for receipts and programs and the other small evidence of being alive, and went to work. She did not examine why she kept it. She was getting very good at not examining things. She suspected, at some level she was not yet ready to visit, that this was temporary. Chapter 6, What We Perform and What We Mean. The Savoy Ballroom on a Thursday after midnight was a different country from the Savoy on a Friday at 9, and it was a different country again from the Savoy at any hour when the well-dressed crowd had not yet gone home and been replaced by the people who had decided that home could wait. By the time Estelle arrived with Cecile at 11:30, the band on the main floor was deep into something that had started as a standard and was becoming its own argument, and the room had reached the temperature, not of air, but of collective intention, that made it worth attending. Estelle moved through it with the ease of a woman who has never in her life been unsure of her welcome. The room parted for her in the way rooms parted for Estelle, not dramatically, not with any single gesture, but with a general consensus that she was where she was supposed to be and the room should arrange itself accordingly. Cecile walked beside her and watched this happen and thought, this is what authority looks like when it has nothing to prove. She had been watching Estelle for 3 weeks now. The watching had become, without her planning it, something she was very good at. There's someone I want you to meet, Estelle said, close to her ear so it would carry over the music. Her breath was warm. Cecile did not think about this. The someone was at the far end of the room, at a table near the bandstand, in a dress the color of old ivory. She was tall and still in the way of certain people who have learned that stillness is a form of presence, and she was watching the band with the quality of attention that Cecile recognized because she had felt it herself, the attention of someone who is not merely listening but receiving. When she looked up and saw Estelle, something warm moved through her face. Then she saw Cecile, and something else moved through it, not suspicion, not appraisal, but a quality of genuine interest that arrived before politeness could manage it, which was how Cecile recognized it as real. Estelle. She rose and they embraced with the ease of people who have known each other long enough to have a history that could be gestured at without being spoken. You're late. I'm exactly on time, Estelle said. Cecile, this is Odette Crane. Odette, Cecile Thibodeau. The poet, Odette said. She said it the way people who mean it say it, as a description rather than a decoration. The singer, Cecile said, because she had asked about Odette after Estelle had mentioned she would be here tonight, and what she had been told had been considerable. Odette smiled. It was not a performance of a smile. Sit down, both of you. They're about to do something interesting. They sat. The introduction to Odette was careful in the way that Estelle's deliberate acts were always careful, positioned, managed, offered in a way that looked unmanaged. Cecile had begun to be able to distinguish between the two. The distinction was small but legible, like a word that has been crossed out and rewritten in identical ink. You could see the effort only if you were looking for it. She was always looking. The band finished the argument it had been having with the standard and arrived somewhere new, and the room responded with that particular release of held breath, and Odette said something to Estelle about the pianist's left hand that made Estelle nod with the brief, precise nod she gave to things that were accurate, and Cecile watched Estelle's face do the thing it did when she was genuinely interested, not the performance of interest but the real thing, unguarded, turned entirely toward Odette's words. She had learned, over 3 weeks, to catalogue these moments. The real face and the performed face. They were not very different. Estelle had spent years making them close, but the real one was quieter. More still. It was the face of someone who has put down something heavy. Odette caught her watching and raised an eyebrow. Not unkindly. More in the manner of someone who has noticed a naturalist at work and is not opposed to being studied. Cecile looked away. Then looked back, because it seemed more honest. Odette, to her credit, looked amused. The evening continued. The band played. People came and went at the table, musicians Estelle knew, an editor Cecile recognized from a crisis party, a photographer whose name Cecile lost almost immediately because she had been watching Estelle accept a drink and say thank you in a way that was gracious and final simultaneously, a 2-word sentence that closed a door without appearing to. The arrangement was working, Cecile understood. The rooms were noticing them. The noticing had a different quality now, not the first inner quality of is that? But the consolidating quality of yes, of course, and this was what Rollins had been building toward, and it was working. She was less interested in the working than she had expected to be. You're doing the thing again, Estelle said. She did not look at Cecile when she said it, she was watching the band. What thing? The cataloguing. I thought you found that alarming. I said it was a professional failing. I did not say alarming. A pause. You're cataloguing me. Among others, Cecile said. You're the most interesting subject in the room. A silence followed this. It lasted approximately 2 seconds, which was long enough for Cecile to become aware that she had said something that exceeded the arrangement and not long enough for her to call it back. Estelle did not react visibly. She was watching the band with the steady attention she brought to things she was deciding how to respond to. The band is very good tonight, Estelle said. Yes, Cecile agreed. This was, she thought, how it worked between them, the thing said, the space given, the pivot to something safer, and the understanding between them that the thing said had been heard and filed and would not be named but would not be forgotten either. They had developed this language over 3 weeks without discussing it, the way you develop a language with someone you spend enough time with, out of necessity, out of repeated proximity, out of the slow accumulation of moments in which one of you nearly says the true thing and the other one nearly responds to it. It was, she was aware, a very particular kind of intimacy. She was also aware that she was not supposed to call it that. Later in the evening, when Estelle had gone to speak with a man across the room about something she'd been told by Rollins to speak with him about, Cecile found herself beside Odette at the bar. You've been watching her all night, Odette said. She said it without accusation, the way you state a thing that is plainly true. I told her I find her the most interesting subject in the room, Cecile said. She changed the subject. She always does. Odette studied her glass. Tell me about your work. I've read some of it. What did you think? I thought you were writing around something. She said it with the same straightforward quality, the lack of any intention to wound. The poems are extraordinary. The feeling in them is extraordinary. But there's something they're not quite arriving at. She looked at Cecile. I thought that when I read them. I think it less now. Cecile was quiet for a moment. The music was loud enough that their conversation was private without requiring whispering, which was a gift she was grateful for. What changed? I watched you watch her, Odette said simply. Cecile looked at Odette. She had the feeling, familiar, lately, the feeling of someone who has been walking on carefully maintained ice and has heard it creak, of something beneath her giving slightly. The arrangement, she began. Yes, Odette said. I know what the arrangement is. Her voice was warm, not dismissive. I'm not speaking about the arrangement. There was a pause in which neither of them said anything, and the band behind them played something that lifted and then quietly, deliberately, did not resolve. How long have you known her? Cecile asked. Since 1919. Odette's eyes moved across the room to where Estelle was in conversation, composed, present, giving the man she was speaking with exactly as much as the conversation required. A long time. Cecile started. Stopped. She's very difficult to know. She is, Odette agreed. She is also, she paused, in the manner of someone selecting the right container for something fragile. She is worth knowing. The difficulty isn't the point of her. The difficulty is just the surface. A pause. Give her time. Be patient with the surface. Cecile looked at her. You speak about her as though you know her very well. I do know her very well, Odette said. There was nothing complicated in her voice when she said it, no claim, no hurt, just simple fact. We have a history. It's a completed history. But yes, I know her. She looked at Cecile for a moment with the quality of someone reading something just behind the eyes. She notices more than she lets on. She always has. If she looks at you a beat too long, it's not nothing. Cecile said nothing. Odette smiled, briefly. I'm glad she brought you tonight, she said. I wanted to see you. Estelle returned then, moving through the thinning crowd with the unhurried precision that was simply how she moved through the world, and she looked at the two of them at the bar with something that was too contained to be called an expression but that Cecile, by now, could read as a variety of assessment. Am I interrupting? Estelle said. We were discussing your band, Odette said, which was the kind of social grace that landed so smoothly you almost believed it. And? Estelle looked at Cecile. The pianist's left hand is very good, Cecile said. She looked at Estelle steadily. I was told this would be the correct thing to appreciate. Something happened in Estelle's face, the suppressed laugh, quick and real and almost entirely contained, and Odette watched this with an expression that she arranged into pleasantness before anyone could have described what it had been a moment before. It is the correct thing, Estelle said. You're learning. They left at 2 a.m, when the Savoy had become its last, most honest self, sparse and warm and full of people who had stopped performing even the performance of having a good time and were simply having one. The car was waiting. Cecile was aware, settling into the seat, of the quality of the evening behind her, textured, alive, full of things she had not entirely accounted for. She's extraordinary, Cecile said. Odette. Yes, Estelle agreed. She was looking out the window, at Harlem going by in its late-night iteration. She is. How long were you? Cecile stopped herself. Estelle looked at her. We were what? I'm sorry. That's not, she shook her head. That's not within the terms of the arrangement. Estelle looked at her for a long moment. The car moved through the dark, Harlem sliding past the windows like something being quietly narrated. A long time ago, Estelle said. Before I knew how to, she stopped. A pause that was not hesitation but the deliberate kind, the kind where someone is deciding what to offer. Before I knew myself as well as I do now. Cecile looked at her hands in her lap. Thank you, she said. I didn't tell you anything. You told me something, Cecile said. I won't press it further. Another silence, this one different, not the sealing kind but the kind that comes after something has been acknowledged without being named, which was its own kind of intimacy, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. The car stopped in front of Cecile's building on 133rd Street. She gathered her things. At the door, she turned back. Estelle. Yes. Cecile looked at her, the careful architecture of her, the stillness and the garnet dress and the hands that were the most expressive thing about her without ever being undisciplined, and thought of what Odette had said. If she looks at you a beat too long, it's not nothing. Good night, she said. Good night, Cecile, Estelle said. The car pulled away. Cecile went upstairs and sat at the writing table. She opened her notebook. She wrote, says, give her time. Be patient with the surface. I think the surface is exactly as long as she needs it to be. I think I am starting to understand that there is an interior and that it is not nothing. She looked at this for a while. Then she wrote, below it, in smaller letters, I think I have been here before. Not this room, not this arrangement. But this particular quality of paying attention to someone and feeling the attention pay itself back. I have been here before. I called it longing. I put it in poems. I addressed it to the air. I know, now, that it was never addressed to the air. She closed the notebook and did not open it again that night. She lay in the dark for a while, in the apartment that was, she realized, beginning to feel like hers, and she thought about the evening and about Odette's particular quality of wisdom and about the 2 seconds of silence after she had said you're the most interesting subject in the room, and about the small, real laugh that Estelle could not quite manage to suppress. She thought, I am in considerable trouble. Then, more quietly, with a quality she recognized as relief, I know exactly what kind. Chapter 7, The Education of Cecile Thibodeau. The rehearsal space was on the 3rd floor of a building on 128th Street that had been, at various points in its history, a dry goods warehouse, a dance hall, and something Estelle declined to specify, and which was now the place she rented on Tuesday and Thursday mornings to work with her musicians in the particular privacy of a room that had not yet been decided by an audience. You don't have to come, Estelle had said, on the phone the previous evening. They had a telephone arrangement now, brief and practical, the way their arrangements tended to be. It won't be interesting. I'd like to, Cecile said. A pause. It will be loud. And tedious in places. I stop and start without explaining why. I understand. Another pause. All right. 10 o'clock. Cecile arrived at 5 to 10, which she had decided was the right interval, early enough to demonstrate seriousness, not so early as to seem without other occupation. The building smelled like turpentine and old wood and something faintly musical, as if the walls had absorbed sound over years and were slowly returning it. She climbed to the 3rd floor and pushed open the door that had Beaumont chalked on a small board beside it and walked into the kind of controlled chaos that resolves, after a moment of adjustment, into something organized by a logic she hadn't yet learned to read. There were 7 musicians. The pianist, a reed-thin man named Clyde who had the quality of someone thinking about 3 things simultaneously, was working out a passage on a borrowed upright in the corner. The drummer Calvin, whom she recognized from the rent party, from the silent language he and Estelle had spoken over the crowd, was polishing something about his grip with the focused expression of a craftsman examining a joint. 2 horn players were talking near the window. A bassist was tuning. A trombonist was asleep in a chair with such professional confidence that Cecile assumed it was intentional. Estelle was at the center of it with a score open on a music stand and a pencil behind her ear and an expression that was categorically different from the one she wore in public rooms. Not less contained, Estelle was always contained, but differently so. The control here was not management of an impression. It was the control of someone doing precise and demanding work, the way a surgeon is controlled, or an architect. She looked up when Cecile came in. Good, she said, which was all she said, and then she turned back to the score. Cecile found a chair against the wall that was out of the way of everything and sat in it and took out her notebook and understood, almost immediately, that she was not going to write anything useful in it. The rehearsal began in pieces, the way rehearsals do. Not the full piece but sections of it, repeated and adjusted and argued about in the shorthand of people who have been making music together long enough to have their own vocabulary. Estelle led it the way she led everything, with authority that did not feel like authority because it had no need to announce itself. She would stop Calvin mid-phrase with one raised hand and say again, from the bridge, and this time let it breathe, and Calvin would nod and they would go again, and the letting breathe would be different, and Estelle would either nod or say once more and they would go once more. She argued with Clyde about a chord voicing for 20 minutes. This was the most alive Cecile had seen her, in the argument, specifically, not before or after it. She was not angry. She was precise and certain and absolutely committed to the thing she was hearing in her head that Clyde was not yet playing, and Clyde was committed to his own version with equal certainty, and they went back and forth in the way of two people who have enough mutual respect to be genuinely, productively wrong at each other. "Play it once my way," Estelle said. "I played it your way twice already." "Play it once more." Clyde played it her way. Estelle listened with her eyes closed and her head tilted slightly, the listening posture she had, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment. "Now yours," she said. He played it his way. Estelle opened her eyes. She looked at the score. She made a mark with the pencil. "Yours," she said. "You were right." Clyde said nothing, but the quality of his silence was satisfied. Cecile had filled 6 pages of her notebook by the time she realized this and looked down at what she'd written. None of it was about music. It was about hands, Estelle's hands specifically, the way they moved when she was making a point, the way the pencil appeared and disappeared behind her ear without her seeming to notice, the way she held the score open with her left hand while marking it with her right, ink stain at the side of the palm, the particular callousing at the fingertips from strings and keys. It was about the quality of her voice in this room versus other rooms, lower, less curated, the sardonic edge that Cecile had begun to hear in private moments arriving more freely here because there was no need to manage it. It was about the way she looked at the musicians, not as instruments or employees but as collaborators whose disagreement was welcome because it sharpened the thing she was building. It was, Cecile understood, reading back what she'd written, a portrait. An intimate one. The kind you make of someone you have been looking at with a quality of attention that exceeds the occasion. She closed the notebook. Taking notes? It was Calvin, during a break, appearing beside her with a cup of something from a thermos. He offered it to her and she accepted. It turned out to be very strong coffee, which she needed. "Apparently," she said. "About what?" He sat in the empty chair beside hers with the easy physicality of someone who is comfortable in all spaces. "About the rehearsal." He looked at her with the expression of someone who has heard a partial truth and is deciding whether to say so. "She's something, isn't she?" he said. "Not a question." "Yes." "Known her 6 years." He drank his coffee. "She's different in here than she is out there. Most people don't get to see this." He said it conversationally, without emphasis, but Cecile understood it was emphasis. "She invited me." "I know." Calvin glanced over at Estelle, who was reviewing the score with the trombonist, who had woken up and was now fully present and apparently had opinions. "She's never invited anyone to a rehearsal. In 6 years." He looked back at Cecile. "I'm telling you as information." Cecile held the coffee cup in both hands and looked at Estelle across the room and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would be accurate within the terms of the arrangement and nothing she could say outside those terms that she had yet earned the right to. "She's building something new," Calvin said. "The composition. You've probably heard pieces of it." "For bars," Cecile said. "At the rent party on 136th Street, in the second set." She departed from what she'd been playing. Calvin looked at her more carefully. "You heard that?" It was, she searched for the right word. It was the most honest thing I'd heard in years. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, in the tone of someone extending a professional courtesy, "She doesn't know yet what it's about. She doesn't title things until she knows. She's been working on this one for a month and she still hasn't titled it." Cecile looked at him. "I'm telling you as information," he said again, and got up and went back to his drums. The rehearsal ended at 1:30. The musicians packed their cases in the practiced, efficient way of people who have done this 10,000 times, and the room emptied by degrees until it was only Estelle, closing the score on the music stand, and Cecile, still in her chair against the wall. Estelle looked at her. Well, Cecile agreed. Was it interesting? Cecile thought of 6 pages of notebook that were not about music. Yes, she said. Very. Estelle picked up the score and considered it for a moment before rolling it and securing it. You didn't write anything after the first hour. I wrote plenty. Your hands stopped moving. So she had been watching. Cecile absorbed this without letting it show. I was listening, she said. To what? To you argue with Clyde about the chord voicing. She looked at Estelle steadily. You were wrong for the first 19 minutes and then you listened and you changed your mind and you told him he was right without making it cost anything. I don't know many people who can do that. Estelle said nothing for a moment. Then she said, he was right. It would have been dishonest to pretend otherwise. Most people find a way to be honest that still saves face. Most people, Estelle said, are less interested in the work than in being seen to be right about the work. Cecile looked at her. Is that the whole of it? A pause. It's most of it. They walked down the 3 flights of stairs together, and on the street Estelle hailed a cab and asked where Cecile was going, and Cecile said 133rd Street, and Estelle said she was going that way herself, which was a small and unremarkable thing and which was also, Cecile noted, not quite true. Estelle's apartment was on 131st, 2 blocks in the other direction, but she did not say this. They rode in the cab in the particular silence that had developed between them, not uncomfortable, not empty, but textured, like good cloth. Cecile watched the city go by and thought about Calvin saying she's never invited anyone to a rehearsal in 6 years and about Odette saying if she looks at you a beat too long it's not nothing and about 6 pages of her own handwriting that were not about music at all. The cab stopped in front of her building. Thank you, Cecile said. For letting me come. Estelle looked at her with the sustained gaze she used when she was making up her mind about something. Next Thursday, she said. If you'd like. I'd like, Cecile said. She got out. The cab pulled away. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the cold and the particular aliveness of the city in daytime, and then went inside. Miriam Lott appeared that same evening, not at Cecile's building, but at a benefit reception at the home of a doctor on Strivers Row that both she and Estelle had been scheduled to attend. The rooms at these events had a particular quality, good furniture, good manners, and the concentrated presence of people who were all in the business of managing how they were seen while watching how everyone else was being seen, which made them, in Cecile's estimation, very hard work. Miriam found her during the cocktail hour, in the way Miriam always found people, as if she had simply been there already and you had only now arrived beside her. Miss Thibodeau. The warmest possible voice. You look very well. Thank you, Mrs. Lott. Are you settling into Harlem? I know it takes time, coming from Philadelphia. She said Philadelphia with the gentle warmth of someone noting a deficiency they would not be so unkind as to call a deficiency. I'm finding my footing, Cecile said. Well, you have excellent company while you do it. Miriam's gaze moved, with the precision of something calibrated, to where Estelle was across the room. Estelle is so particular about who she spends her time with. It's quite something, to have been chosen. Cecile held her champagne glass and smiled pleasantly. She's been very generous. She has, hasn't she? Miriam studied her with the warmest imaginable interest. And your work, do you find Harlem inspiring? I've always felt the energy here is particular. I'm writing more than I was in Philadelphia, Cecile said, which was true in the sense that she was filling notebook pages at a rate she had not managed in years, though what she was writing was not yet anything she'd call finished work. How wonderful. Miriam touched her arm briefly, the intimate gesture of a woman claiming familiarity she has not been given. I do hope you'll read something at my Thursday evening soon. I host a literary salon, nothing grand, just a few people who care about letters. Estelle comes occasionally. It would be lovely to have you both. That's very kind, Cecile said. I'll send a card. Miriam smiled and moved away, and Cecile stood for a moment with her champagne and the faint sense of having been examined very carefully by someone who was good enough at it to make the examination feel like warmth. Estelle appeared at her elbow. "Well," she said. "She wants me to read at her Thursday salon." Cecile turned to her. "She's very skilled. The most skilled person in most rooms." Estelle looked where Miriam had gone. "What did she actually say?" Cecile repeated it, efficiently. Estelle listened. "Quite something, to have been chosen," she repeated. "She's testing whether you know what you are in this arrangement. Whether it's occurred to you to feel like less than the protagonist." "I'm a poet," Cecile said. "I'm always the protagonist. Even when I'm not." Estelle looked at her sharply, and then the suppressed laugh arrived, quick, involuntary, entirely real, and she pressed her lips together a half-second too late. Cecile looked at her. "Don't," Estelle said. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to say something." "I was going to say that's the first time I've made you laugh where you couldn't entirely hide it." She looked at her drink. "I find that I'd like to do it again." The quiet that followed was different from their usual quiet. It had a quality of something left in it, not said, but present, the way a note sustains after the key has been released. "Come and meet Dr. Harrington," Estelle said. "He's been wanting to discuss your second collection." "You read my second collection?" Cecile said. Estelle did not answer this. She had already begun moving toward Dr. Harrington, and her back was very straight and her pace was entirely composed, and if there was a slight more color in the back of her neck than there had been a moment ago, it was entirely possible that was the warmth of the room. Cecile followed her. She was, she thought, becoming very good at this, at following, at waiting, at the patient accumulation of moments in which Estelle was briefly, incompletely, herself. She was also becoming increasingly aware that patience had a season, and that seasons ended. Chapter 8, Other People's Histories. The letter from Fletcher arrived on a Wednesday. It was, as Fletcher's letters always were, precisely what it appeared to be. No second meanings, no undertow. He wrote in the careful, unhurried hand of a man who has been taught that precision is a form of respect, and the letter was 4 paragraphs, and each paragraph said exactly what it said and nothing more. The first paragraph asked how she was. The second paragraph described Philadelphia in February, a burst pipe at the house, the repair, a dinner with mutual friends who had asked after her. He wrote this without editorializing, without the passive weight of mentioned names designed to remind her of what she'd left. The third paragraph said, "I have been thinking, and I believe you should take whatever time you need. I don't think I fully understood, and I am not certain I understand now, but I am trying to. The apartment is here when you want it. I am here, in whatever form is useful." The fourth paragraph said he had enclosed a clipping from the Philadelphia Tribune that had mentioned her crisis poem and that he'd found it a very fine thing. The clipping was there, folded neatly inside. Cecile read the letter twice at the writing table and then set it down and made tea she did not drink and stood by the window for a while looking at 133rd Street going about its business beneath her. The letter was so decent it was devastating. That was the word, devastating, and she thought it without apology. It was not cruel that he was decent. It was simply that his decency could not repair the fundamental wrongness of the shape, which was not his fault and was not her fault and was simply the fact of it. She had married the wrong answer to a question she had not yet fully understood she was asking. She knew now what the question was. She had known she sat with this, she had known for some weeks. She had been knowing it by degrees since she'd walked into a brownstone on 135th Street and heard a piano and felt something in her chest rearrange itself, and she had been knowing it more clearly since the tea room on Lenox Avenue, and more clearly still since the night at the Savoy when Odette had said, "I watched you watch her," in the tone of someone who has recognized something they have seen before. She left the letter on the writing table. She put on her coat. She did not know where she was going until she was on the street, and then she turned north toward Edgecombe Avenue, where Odette lived, because this was, she realized, the person she had been walking toward. She had not telephoned ahead. She was, she thought, becoming more like Dorothea. Odette opened the door with an expression of mild, unsurprised pleasure, as if Cecile were arriving precisely when she'd been expected. "Come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." The apartment was warm and had the quality of a space inhabited by someone who knows exactly what she wants around her. A few very good pieces, a piano in the corner that was clearly played, a shelf of books that had actually been read. Odette moved through it with the ease of long familiarity, and Cecile sat on the sofa and looked at the piano and thought about pianos. "I got a letter," Cecile said, when Odette came back. "From whom?" "Fletcher. He's still my husband, technically." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "It was kind. Genuinely kind. He asked about my work. He said the apartment is there whenever I want it." Odette sat across from her. She did not say anything immediately, which was one of the things Cecile had come to understand about her, that she held space for things to arrive in their own order. "What did you feel when you read it?" Odette said. "Sad," Cecile said. "And relieved. And guilty that I was relieved. And guilty that the guilt was about the relief rather than about him." She looked at her coffee. "He's a good man. He was not the wrong man. He was the wrong answer to the wrong question, and I don't know how to tell him that without it sounding like blame, which it isn't." "Some things don't have a language yet," Odette said. "You can only approximate. I'm a poet. Approximation is a professional failure." Odette smiled. "Even poets approximate. The best ones are just honest about it." They were quiet for a moment. Outside, a pigeon made an argument on the windowsill and abandoned it. "Can I ask you something?" Cecile said. "About Estelle?" "Yes. You said you have a history. A completed history." She looked at Odette. Was she the one who? "She held me at a distance," Odette said, without difficulty. "It's what she does. She did not mean to. She is." A pause. "Estelle has spent a very long time protecting herself by controlling what she offers. She knows how to be wanted. She offers exactly enough to make someone feel chosen, and exactly little enough to make sure they can never quite arrive." She picked up her own cup. "I was 23 and I believed, for about 2 years, that if I was patient enough the door would open. It didn't. Not because she didn't care for me, she did. I believe she still does, in the way she cares for people she trusts, but because she didn't know how. She'd taught herself that letting someone fully in meant letting them fully out, eventually, and one way to prevent the second was to prevent the first." Cecile was very still. "She's not cruel," Odette said. "I want to be clear about that. She is frightened. In the way that people who are very good at not being frightened are frightened. You never see it because she never stops long enough for it to show." "She stopped," Cecile said. "At the Savoy. When she told me about you, she said, before I knew myself as well as I do now." She was quiet. She said it like she was offering something. Then she probably was. Odette looked at her steadily. "She doesn't offer things by accident." She stopped herself before she finished the sentence. She always stops before she finishes the sentence. Odette set down her cup. "That's what I mean. She knows how to be wanted. She has not yet learned how to be loved. Someone is going to have to go first." The words landed in the room and sat there. Cecile looked at the piano in the corner. She thought about the 4 bars she'd heard at the rent party. The moment in the second set when the music had briefly, incompletely, shown its own interior. She thought about Calvin saying she's never invited anyone to a rehearsal in 6 years with the weight of someone extending information as a gift. "She's writing something," Cecile said. "A composition. She doesn't know what it's about yet." Odette looked at her with an expression of such precise, clear warmth that Cecile felt, for a moment, completely seen. "I know," Odette said. "She told me about it last week." "What did she say?" Odette was quiet for a moment. Then, she said it was about the particular quality of being seen when you hadn't prepared to be. The room was very quiet. Cecile set down her coffee cup because her hands had become unreliable. "I see," she said. Her voice was even. She was putting a great deal of herself into that evenness. Yes, Odette said, gently. I thought you might. They talked for another hour, about other things, carefully chosen other things, the kind of conversation that happens after the important thing has been said and both people are allowing it to settle. Odette talked about a residency she was considering in Chicago. Cecile talked about the poems she had been writing, the ones she hadn't shown anyone, the ones she had been writing on envelopes and in margins, and in the small hours when she could hear, from somewhere 2 blocks away, the sound of a piano working something out. When Cecile stood to go, Odette walked her to the door. Be brave, Odette said. She said it simply, the way you say things that are simple and enormous. I don't know if I know how, Cecile said. You know how. You've been translating your interior life into language your entire adult life. Odette looked at her. The only difference is this time, instead of putting it in a poem, you'll have to put it in a room. Cecile walked back to 133rd Street through the February cold with her hands in her pockets and the particular clarity that sometimes arrives after a conversation that has named something. The city moved around her. She let it. She did not go home directly. She walked for 20 minutes, down 7th Avenue, which at this hour had the quality of something still deciding what to be, and she thought about the shape of what she was in the middle of. She had arrived in Harlem carrying the wreckage of a marriage she had entered in good faith and the beginning of an understanding she had not yet had the courage to name. She had walked into a room and heard a piano and written one true line in her notebook and had been not looking at it ever since. She had entered an arrangement that was supposed to be finite and managed and professional. None of these things had stayed what they were supposed to be. This was, she thought, the essential fact of being alive, that things did not stay what they were supposed to be. That the map was always wrong, by some increment, and the only option was to be honest about the territory. She was standing in the territory now. She could see it clearly. The question was what she was going to do with the seeing. She did not answer this. Not yet. She let it be a question, which was harder and more honest than an answer, and she walked home in the cold with it accompanying her like a sound she'd just begun to learn to hear. Back at the writing table, she picked up Fletcher's letter and read it one more time. She thought about what she owed him, honesty, eventually, in whatever form she could manage. She thought about the apartment is there when you want it and the particular grief of a man who would wait without understanding fully what he was waiting for, because he was decent, and because decency sometimes meant not understanding. She folded the letter and put it in the back of her notebook. Then she picked up her pen and opened to a fresh page. She did not write a poem. She wrote a sentence. I know what the question is. I know what the answer is. I am afraid of what the answer costs. Then, below it, Odette says, someone has to go first. She looked at these sentences for a long time. Then she wrote, I have been afraid of costs my whole life. I have been paying them anyway, quietly, in the currency of the life I didn't live. I think maybe that is worse. I think maybe the explicit cost is kinder than the silent one. She put the cap back on the pen. Outside, Harlem had reached the hour at which it committed itself fully to being awake and lively, which was a commitment it made without reservation, and the sound of it came through the windows, music from somewhere, voices, the warm rumble of the city's decision to be itself at all hours. Cecile sat in it and was, for the first time in a long time, not afraid of what she knew. She was afraid of what she would do with what she knew. But that was different. That was the kind of afraid that meant something was real. Chapter 9, The Promise of the Premise. The arrangement was working. This was the fact that Rollins delivered to Estelle over lunch at the end of the 4th week, with the restrained satisfaction of a man who has managed a complicated piece of business well and is allowing himself a modest acknowledgement of this. The whispers had quieted. The society pages were friendly in the way that meant they had moved on to other subjects, which was, he explained, the ideal outcome, not attention but the absence of the wrong kind of attention. Miriam Lott had been seen at 2 events where Estelle and Cecile were also present and had said, on each occasion, nothing pointed at all. Which means she's satisfied? Estelle asked. Which means she's waiting, Rollins said. But she has less to wait for now. He folded his napkin. 2 more weeks and the arrangement concludes on schedule. The story doesn't get written. Your season at the Savoy proceeds without complication. He looked at her. You seem less pleased than I expected. I'm pleased, Estelle said. She was not unpleased. She was something else. She was aware, as she had been aware for approximately the past 2 weeks, of a quality of attentiveness in herself that she did not fully account for, a noticing that had become habitual without her deciding to make it habitual. She noticed when Cecile arrived at events before she expected her. She noticed the notebook in the coat pocket, the slight angle of attention when something caught her interest, the way she was careful with her silences in a manner that suggested the silences were doing work. She noticed the moments when Cecile almost said something and did not. There were more of those lately. On both sides. 2 more weeks, she said. 2 more weeks, Rollins confirmed. Unless you want to extend it. I hadn't thought about whether extending was, whether there was a reason to. But if the professional benefit. No, Estelle said. 6 weeks was the arrangement. Rollins looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has noticed something he has decided, for now, not to name. Of course, he said. The 4th week had a particular texture to it. Looking back on it later, Cecile would identify this as the week in which the accumulation became something she could no longer pretend was merely accumulating. It had become a fact, the way sediment becomes stone, the way something that moves slowly enough that you don't track its movement has nevertheless moved. There was the taxicab. She had not meant to reach for Estelle's hand. It was late, after the benefit at the library on 136th Street, a fundraiser for something she had been told about and almost immediately stopped tracking because Estelle had come in wearing midnight blue and had looked at Cecile across the room with the kind of look that was not meant to be a look and had been exactly that regardless. In the cab on the way home, the city moving past the windows, their silence between them comfortable and inhabited, Cecile's hand had simply moved. Found Estelle's in the dark. Estelle had not moved away. They had ridden the rest of the way in that configuration, hands, neither of them commenting, neither of them pulling back, and Cecile had been very aware of the warmth of it, the calluses at Estelle's fingertips, the quality of the not pulling away which was a thing being chosen. The cab stopped at Cecile's building. Estelle's hand had been the one to lift first, with the deliberateness that was simply how Estelle released things, by decision, by intention. Nothing accidental. Good night, she'd said. Good night, Cecile had said. She had not slept for some time. There was the argument. Estelle had read her crisis poems, not the new writing, which Cecile had not shown anyone, but the published ones. The ones that had been praised for their luminous restraint. She had mentioned this at dinner without preamble, in the middle of a conversation about something else, which was how Estelle sometimes introduced the important things, sideways, as if they were continuations of other conversations. They're beautiful, Estelle said. Thank you, Cecile said. A pause. The pause that meant something was coming. They're also careful, Estelle said. More careful than you are. Cecile looked at her. What does that mean? It means the feeling in them is real, I can hear it, but the poem is standing slightly away from the feeling. There's glass between the feeling and the reader. It's beautiful glass. Very well-made glass. She met Cecile's eyes. But glass. You're saying my published work is dishonest. I'm saying it's a pause. I'm saying there's something in you that your work is describing from a distance. I hear what's not being said more than what is. She held Cecile's gaze. That's a choice you made. A strategic choice. It may have been the right one. I'm not saying it was wrong. You're just saying it was glass. Yes. The silence that followed was different from their other silences. Cecile felt, and this surprised her, the force of it, a flush of something close to anger. Not because Estelle was wrong. Because she was right, and had said so in a room where Cecile had not been ready to hear it. You're telling me what my work is, she said. I'm telling you what I hear in it, Estelle said. I may be wrong. I often hear things that aren't there. You don't, Cecile said, which was true and which they both knew. You hear exactly what's there. That's what you do. She looked at her hands. I know the poems are careful. I wrote them that way. I was writing in a language I'd decided was safe. Estelle said nothing. She was giving Cecile the space, which was what she did. I'm writing differently now, Cecile said quietly. Not carefully. I don't know yet if it's any good, but it's not glass. She had not meant to say this. She had not meant to say anything that confirmed there was new writing. Estelle knew now that there was new writing, and Estelle would not ask to see it because Estelle did not press, but she would know, and the knowing would be between them. Good, Estelle said. Just that. And then she talked about something else, and Cecile's hands were not entirely steady for the rest of the evening, and she was not certain whether it was the criticism or the listening or both. There was the evening in the kitchen. It was a Tuesday, late. They had been at a reception at the home of a poet Cecile admired and whom Estelle had known for years, and the reception had gone long, and neither of them had eaten adequately because the food at these events was always more decorative than sustaining. They had ended up in Estelle's kitchen at past 1 in the morning with crackers from the pantry and cold chicken that Estelle produced from the icebox with the unfussy practicality she brought to domestic things. She was, Cecile had discovered, surprisingly capable in a kitchen, in the way of someone who has lived alone for a long time and learned to feed herself without ceremony. They sat at the kitchen table. The kitchen was small and warm and had the feel of a room that was used, lived in, not managed. The composition book was on the counter, open to a page of notation. The lamp threw a yellow circle and outside the window Harlem continued at its late-night pitch. They ate and talked about the reception and about the poet they'd met and about a review Cecile had read of a musician Estelle was ambivalent about, and Cecile watched Estelle's hands move around the food and the coffee cup, and she thought about the cab, and about Odette saying someone has to go first, and about the fact that the arrangement had 8 days left, which was a number she had not been counting but which was apparently counted nonetheless. She looked at Estelle's hands. She thought, I am running out of time in a way that has nothing to do with the calendar. She thought, the calendar is the smaller problem. You're quiet, Estelle said. I'm always quiet. You're quieter than quiet. Cecile looked up. Estelle was watching her with the quality of attention she used when she was deciding something. The kitchen was very still. I'm thinking, Cecile said. About what? A pause in which Cecile weighed what to offer and what to hold. About the arrangement ending, she said. 8 days. Estelle's hands stilled on her coffee cup. Yes. I haven't answered Fletcher's letter. She said it to the table. I've been waiting to understand what I was answering from. And now? I understand better than I did. She looked up. I know what I'm going toward. I'm still working out how to go toward it. She held Estelle's eyes. I'm aware that's not specific. Estelle looked at her for a long moment. The lamp held its circle. The city held its breath. 8 days is enough time to be specific, Estelle said finally. If you decide you want to be. She said it with the careful, neutral quality that could have meant anything. Cecile understood, as she had come to understand Estelle's careful neutral qualities, that it meant exactly what it appeared to mean and also something else entirely, and that both were true simultaneously, and that this was the particular gift and torture of being in proximity to someone who communicated in layers. I know, Cecile said. They finished eating. Estelle washed the plates, because she was the kind of person who washed plates immediately. Cecile dried them, because she was in the kitchen and this was what you did, and they stood at the sink together in the easy, unremarkable proximity of people who have spent enough time near each other that the nearness has stopped requiring management, and outside the window Harlem went on being Harlem, and the lamp held its circle, and neither of them said anything that required saying. This was, Cecile thought, what she had not known how to want. Not the dramatic version of love that she had read about and translated into careful, glassy poems, but this, the kitchen at 1 in the morning, the ordinary proximity, the warmth of being near someone who had decided to know you and had not yet quite let you see the deciding. This was the thing she had been writing toward for 17 years without knowing the address. She dried the last plate. Estelle set it in the cabinet. Their hands were 3 inches apart. I should go, Cecile said. Yes, Estelle agreed. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Estelle said, with the quality of something she had thought about and decided to offer, come to the last set of the month. Saturday week. I'm doing something new. Cecile looked at her. I'll be there, she said. She went home. She sat at the writing table and she did not write anything careful or glassy or addressed to the air. She wrote in the new way, the way she had been writing for 4 weeks in margins and on envelopes, the way that was not yet titled and was not yet finished and was addressed to someone specific and would not pretend otherwise. She wrote for 2 hours and stopped and read it back and thought, this is the most honest thing I've written since I was 19 and didn't know enough to be afraid. She was afraid now. That was the difference. She was afraid and she was writing toward it anyway, which was perhaps what honesty always cost, and perhaps why she had been paying the silent version for so long. She closed the notebook. She thought about Estelle's hands, 3 inches from hers, and about a composition that had no title yet, and about something new, which was a phrase that carried more weight than it appeared to. She thought, 8 days. And then whatever comes after 8 days. She did not know what that was. She thought, for the first time without the flinch, that she wanted to find out. Chapter 10, Arrangement in Blue and Leaving. She came on a Thursday. Not the last set, that was Saturday still, 2 days away. She came because Estelle had telephoned at 7:30 in the evening and said, without preamble, are you free tonight? And Cecile had said yes before she understood what she was saying yes to, which was how she answered things lately, from the place below deliberation, the place where she had apparently been making decisions for some time without consulting the rest of herself. Not a public event, Estelle said. Not the arrangement. Just, come. Cecile put on her coat and went. The apartment looked the same as it always did, organized, warm, the Steinway in the center of the front room like a given fact. But Estelle was in her house dress, which was the first time Cecile had seen her in her house dress, and the difference it made was not about what she was wearing but about what she was not wearing, which was the management. The careful, exquisite performance of Estelle Beaumont at large in the world. Without it, she was, not less. More. The way a room with its furniture rearranged reveals a quality of light that had always been there and was only now unmistakable. Sit, Estelle said. Not unkindly. Anywhere. Cecile chose the good chair, the one near the window, which she had sat in once before, at a rehearsal post-mortem Estelle had conducted in her own front room, reviewing her notes while Cecile sat quietly and tried to be furniture. She sat there now and put her coat over the arm and her notebook in her lap and did not open it. Estelle went to the piano. She did not explain what she was going to play. She did not arrange herself in any way that suggested performance. She sat on the bench with the house dress and the lamp and the window cracked slightly to the February cold, and she sat there for a moment with her hands in her lap before she put them on the keys, and in that moment she was the most completely present person Cecile had ever been in a room with. Not performing presence. Not managing the impression of presence. Simply there, entirely, the way certain people are entirely there and most are not. She played. Cecile had heard her play many times. She had heard her at rent parties and the Savoy and the Cotton Club and in the rehearsal space on 128th Street, had heard her play for rooms and for musicians and for herself at the end of a party when the guests were gone and only the closest few remained. She had heard her play the 4 bars, the unnamed thing, in the second set at the rent party on 135th Street, those few measures that had stepped outside the arrangement of the evening and briefly, incompletely, revealed an interior. She had not heard this. This was something without an audience. That was the first thing she understood, not that the music was different in kind, but that it was being played with no awareness of being heard. Estelle with nowhere to be, Estelle with nothing to curate or offer or manage, Estelle simply making sound in the particular darkness of late winter with the window cracked and the lamp throwing its yellow circle, and the sound she was making was the most naked thing Cecile had ever heard. It moved through 3 keys, which she recognized from the 4 bars. There it was, the base of it, the 4 bars she'd first heard from across a smoky room 7 weeks ago, but they were not 4 bars anymore. They had grown into something. A movement. And there were others, a second movement that was more formal, contained, almost prim, and a third that cracked open the formality with a quarter note held a beat too long, a chord that reached for resolution and then simply didn't. Held. Let the not resolving be its own kind of statement. Cecile was aware, at some point, that she had stopped breathing in the ordinary way. She was breathing differently, slowly, as if breath was a resource to be conserved during something essential. The music said, "Here is the shape of wanting something before you have named it." The music said, "Here is the particular quality of being seen when you had not prepared to be." Cecile looked at her own hands. She thought, I have been writing about this sound for 17 years. I did not know it was a sound. I thought it was a quality of light, or of time passing, or of the abstract condition of longing that I kept putting in poems and addressing to the air. It was a sound. It was this sound. Estelle played. The third movement opened, just slightly, like a door moved by a draft rather than a hand, into something that was not quite joy but was adjacent to it, the thing that comes just before joy, when you understand that joy is possible and you are afraid of it, which is its own very specific feeling, and she played that feeling precisely, without sentimentality, the way she played everything, with complete honesty and not one note more than the thing required. There was a fourth movement. Cecile felt it before she heard it, some atmospheric shift, some quality of gathering in the room, as if the piece was deciding whether to complete itself or remain forever in the territory of almost. It resolved. Quietly. Incompletely. Not with finality but with the suggestion of a door, slightly open and light on the other side. Then it was over. The silence was very full. Cecile realized her hand was pressed flat against the notebook cover and she did not remember pressing it there. She looked at Estelle, who was sitting at the piano with the afterimage of the music still in the room, still partly inside it, in the particular way of musicians after a performance that had asked something real of them. Estelle was trembling. Very slightly, in the hands. Cecile saw this because she had spent 7 weeks learning to see what Estelle kept small, and this was small but it was there. The silence held. Then Estelle said, without looking at her, "You should come Saturday night. Last set of the month. I'm doing something new." She had said this before, Cecile remembered. A week ago, in the kitchen, at 1 in the morning. She was saying it again, and this time Cecile understood that it was not the same statement. The first time it had been an invitation. This time it was something closer to a declaration. "Is that what you were playing?" Cecile asked. "Yes." Estelle looked up. Her face was very still. "Parts of it. Not all of it." A pause. "It's not finished. I know the shape of it now. I didn't for a long time. What is it called?" Estelle looked at the piano keys. "I don't know yet." Cecile said, "When did you start writing it?" A long silence. The lamp held its circle. Estelle's hands were in her lap, the ink stain at the side of the right palm, the calluses at the fingertips. "A long time ago," Estelle said. "The shape of it. The emotional shape. I didn't know what it was about until recently." She was very precise about this, as she was very precise about everything. "I thought it was about one thing and it was about something else." "What was it about?" Cecile said. Estelle looked at her. She held Cecile's eyes for a moment that was long by any measure and longer by the measure of Estelle Beaumont, who was not a woman who looked without deciding to. She looked with the full force of her attention, which was the full force of her, which was considerable, and Cecile looked back and did not look away. "You know what it's about," Estelle said. The room was very quiet. Outside, February was doing something to the trees. The wind had picked up, and it moved through the leaves of the one scraggly tree outside the window in a way that was almost musical, which seemed, given the circumstances, either appropriate or excessive. "Yes," Cecile said. She said it steadily. She was putting a great deal of herself into that steadiness. "I'll be at the last set," she said. "Saturday night." Estelle nodded. She looked back at the piano. Her hands went to the keys for a moment, not playing, just resting, the gesture of someone making contact with a thing they know. "It's better," she said. "I think. Since you've been," she stopped. The sentence did not finish. Cecile was very aware of the sentence that did not finish. She did not press it. She thought of Odette. She always stops before she finishes the sentence. She thought, I could finish it for her. I know what it would say. She did not. Not tonight. Not yet. She thought, there are still 2 days. 2 days and the last set and whatever comes after. She thought, I will be patient for 2 more days and then I will not be patient, because patience has a season and the season ends. She stood. I should go, she said. You should sleep before Saturday. Estelle looked up at her. The expression on her face was not the expression she wore in public, not managed, not curated. It was the face she wore here, in the front room with the lamp and the Steinway and the window cracked to the cold, the face Cecile had been working for 7 weeks to see clearly. It was not a closed face. It was a face at the edge of opening. Good night, Cecile, she said. Cecile went to the door. She put her coat on. She turned back once. Estelle was still at the piano, her hands resting on the keys in the not playing way, looking at the middle distance that musicians sometimes look at when they are still partly inside something. She did not look like a woman who was managing anything. Cecile went out into the February night. It was cold and very clear and Harlem was alive in all directions, and she walked home through it with the sound of the music still in her chest, the fourth movement, particularly, the door slightly open and the light on the other side, and she thought about what she was going to do with what she knew. She thought about it for the entire walk home. She thought about it sitting at her writing table, which she came to without quite knowing she'd sat down. She thought about it while she opened her notebook to the last page of the new writing, the writing that was not careful or glassy or addressed to the air. She thought about it for a long time and then she picked up her pen and she wrote. She wrote for 3 hours. When she finally stopped, the room was very quiet and the city outside was at its quietest, not silent. Harlem was never silent, but resting, that particular 3 a.m. rest of a city that has earned it, and she read back what she had written. It was not finished. It needed more. She could hear the absence of the final movement, the part that resolved, the way the music tonight had resolved, quietly, incompletely, with the suggestion of a door and light on the other side. She would finish it. She knew now that she would finish it, and she knew roughly what finishing it would require. She titled it, for the first time, in pencil at the top of the first page. She titled it with a date, the night she had walked into a brownstone on 136th Street and heard a piano and felt something in her chest rearrange itself. She put the pen down. She was more afraid than she had been of almost anything in her life. She was also, for the first time in a very long time, entirely certain. These 2 things, the fear and the certainty, were not in contradiction. She understood now that they never had been. That certainty did not require the absence of fear. That the most real things were always a little terrifying. She closed the notebook. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the city rest, and she thought about Saturday night, and about a door slightly open, and light on the other side. She did not sleep for a while. But when she did, she slept without dreaming, which was its own kind of certainty. Chapter 11, The Architecture of Distance. The arrangement had 2 weeks left on the calendar, and Estelle had begun, very quietly, to prepare for the end of it. This was what she did. She had always done it. When a run of performances concluded, she packed her music before the last night, folded the arrangements, capped the ink, sent the musicians back to their other lives. When a friendship reached the edge of what she could safely offer, she began, imperceptibly, to widen the distance. Not abandonment. Never anything so legible as that. Just the slow, practiced withdrawal of warmth, a degree here, an inch there, until what remained was cordial and contained and no longer capable of surprising her. She had been doing it since she was 17. She was very good at it. The only problem was that Cecile noticed. She didn't say anything. That was, Estelle was beginning to understand, one of Cecile's particular dangers, the way she registered things without announcing them, catalogued them in whatever interior room she kept her real observations, and then simply continued being present. Not pressing. Not naming. Just there, steady as a lamp, and watching. The morning after the parlor performance, after the house dress and the low lights and the window cracked and the music she had never played for anyone and the terrible, clarifying silence afterward, Estelle had risen early, made coffee, and decided that the parlor would not happen again. It was not a difficult decision. It was the kind of decision she had made so many times that the shape of it was familiar, almost comfortable. The decision to withdraw before it became necessary to withdraw. The decision to leave on her own terms, which was the only leaving she trusted. What she had not accounted for was that the withdrawal was not clean. Cecile arrived that afternoon with a book she had borrowed in a mild, unreadable expression, and sat in the chair by the window and read for an hour while Estelle went over contracts at her desk, and the silence between them was the same silence it had always been, productive and particular, the silence of two people who had learned to occupy the same room without requiring anything of each other, and yet it was entirely different. Estelle was aware of it in a way she had not been before. Aware of Cecile's presence as a specific thing, with weight and dimension, something she had to consciously not reach toward. She had put 2 feet of careful distance between them, and the 2 feet felt like a decision now, where before it had been merely habit. She did not examine this. The arrangement had its rhythms. They continued. Dinners on Tuesday and Thursday, the occasional Saturday evening if there was something requiring a public appearance. Estelle at the club most nights, Cecile sometimes in the audience, sometimes not. They moved through the city with the practiced ease of 2 people who had learned each other's physical grammar, the particular angle of Cecile's shoulder in a crowded room, the way Estelle's hand found the small of her back without requiring thought. It looked, from the outside, exactly as it was supposed to look. Rollins had said so, warmly, over the telephone. The society pages had been complimentary. 2 or 3 columns had noted, with varying degrees of enthusiasm, the pleasing appearance of the celebrated bandleader and her poet companion at the Savoy, at the Abyssinian benefit, at the opening of the new gallery on 131st. Miriam Lott had been quiet for 3 weeks, which was its own kind of testimony. The arrangement was a success. Estelle was performing a successful arrangement, and Cecile was performing along with her, and neither of them mentioned the parlor, and the music Estelle had played remained, for the time being, nameless between them. She was fine. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, addressed to her booking agent and forwarded to her in Rollins' handwriting, and it was from a woman named Mrs. Patterson who wrote for a Harlem social column that operated in the register just below the society pages. Not quite scandal, but the level at which things became interesting, which was worse. Mrs. Patterson wrote to inquire, in the most delicate terms, whether the relationship between Miss Beaumont and the poet Mrs. Thibodeau was of a personal nature. She phrased it very carefully. She was not suggesting anything. She was simply noting that the companionship had continued rather longer than social engagements usually required, and that 1 or 2 of her readers had expressed curiosity, and that she would be grateful for any clarification. Estelle read the letter twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table and made herself a cup of coffee and sat with it for a while. This was the thing. This was the thing Rollins had anticipated and the thing the arrangement had been designed to prevent, and it was happening anyway, not because the arrangement had failed, but because the arrangement had worked too well, had become too real, had generated exactly the kind of sustained and specific attention it was supposed to deflect. She called Rollins. He answered on the 3rd ring, and she read him the letter, and there was a silence on the other end of the line that was longer than she would have liked. The arrangement was supposed to last 6 weeks, he said. It has lasted 6 weeks. It's been closer to 7. Nearly. She did not say anything. Estelle. His voice was careful. Diplomatic in the way it became when he was working towards something he expected her to resist. What would you like me to tell Mrs. Patterson? Tell her nothing. Tell her there is nothing to clarify. That is a statement that functions only if it's true. Rollins. I'm not asking you anything, he said, quickly. I am merely noting that the purpose of the arrangement was to provide clarity, and that clarity is most effective when the situation it describes is still legible. She understood what he was saying. She was being told, gently and with genuine concern for her welfare, that she needed to be more careful. She was being told that the distance she thought she had maintained was not visible from the outside. She was being told that she had, somehow, despite everything, allowed something to become apparent that she had meant to keep private. "I understand," she said. "The arrangement ends in 3 weeks," Rollins said. "After that, I'd suggest a period of quieter engagements. Different company, different occasions. Nothing dramatic. Just a return to how things were." "Yes," Estelle said. "Of course." She hung up the telephone and stood in her kitchen for a moment with her hand still on the receiver, and then she went back to her desk and opened the notebook where she kept her compositions, and she looked at the pages she had been filling for the past 3 weeks, the piece that had no name, the one she had played in the parlor with the window cracked and Cecile in the good chair, and she thought about what a return to how things were would require. The notebook was dense with notation. With revision. With the evidence of a person working towards something very specific, a thing she had been writing for longer than 3 weeks even if she had only understood its subject recently. She closed the notebook. She would play the final composition at the last set of the month. She had already told the musicians. She was not going to unplay it. After that, she told herself, she would be more careful. 2 weeks out, they attended a benefit at the Renaissance Casino, a large room, a good band, the kind of evening that required nothing of them except to be seen and to be pleasant and to make the society pages with their faces composed and their attendance noted. Miriam Lott was there. This was not a surprise. Miriam Lott was always somewhere, occupying the best positioned chair, holding a glass she never finished, watching the room with the patient attention of a woman who understood that most of what was interesting happened at the margins. She found them in the second hour. "Miss Beaumont," she said, materializing at Estelle's right shoulder with a warmth so calibrated it had to be a weapon. "And Mrs. Thibodeau, I've been meaning to say, I read your poem in the Messenger last month. The Cartography of Small Griefs. Extraordinary work." Cecile, to her credit, received this with perfect equanimity. "Thank you, Mrs. Lott." The middle stanza, Miriam continued. She had the particular habit of building toward her point through apparent generosity, and Estelle had learned long ago to track the construction of the sentence rather than its surface. Something about the nature of longing, directed inward, rather than outward. "I thought it was very brave. For a poet to write that honestly about wanting something she cannot name." A small silence. Very small. Cecile's face remained composed. "I think all honest poems are about that," Cecile said. "The thing before it has a name." Miriam smiled. It was a very good smile. "I suppose they are." She looked at Estelle, a glancing look, just long enough. "You must be so pleased to have such a thoughtful companion, Estelle. It quite shows, you know." A pause. A perfectly placed one. "How well she understands you." She moved away. She was already talking to someone else. Estelle stood very still and looked at the middle distance and did not look at Cecile. Cecile stood beside her and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very calmly, "How concerned should I be about that?" "Not very," Estelle said. This was not quite true. "She's been watching us. She watches everyone. It's her occupation. She said it quite shows." Cecile's voice was even. She was not alarmed, exactly. She was cataloging. Estelle recognized the sound of it by now, the particular quality of Cecile's attention when she was measuring something carefully. "I know. Does it concern you?" Estelle finally looked at her. Cecile was watching the room, her face in profile, and there was something in the line of it, the patience of it, the lack of demand, that made the 2-foot distance feel very deliberate. "I'll speak to Rollins," Estelle said. Cecile nodded once. She didn't ask anything else. Estelle would remember this later, the way Cecile had heard the thing Miriam hadn't said, had understood what it meant, and had not pursued it. Had simply stood beside her and let the silence be what it was and not required anything from it. She would remember it as an act of enormous, unusual care. She did not let herself think too much about it at the time. 3 weeks became 2. Estelle rehearsed the new composition with her musicians on a Thursday afternoon, a long rehearsal, 3 hours, the kind that wore everyone down and rebuilt them. She took a chord progression in the third movement apart 4 times until it was right. Her drummer, a man named Calvin who had played with her for 6 years and understood when to speak and when not to, said nothing and played exactly what she asked. The piece was called, she had decided, Arrangement in Blue and Leaving. She did not tell anyone what this meant. Cecile had come to Thursday rehearsals twice before. She did not come to this one. Estelle noticed the absence and told herself she did not. She worked on the composition until 11. She took the long way home. She passed the building on 138th where she had lived before she could afford the apartment she had now, when she was 22 and working 3 venues a week and saving everything and wearing the same 3 dresses in rotation, and she thought about who she had been before she understood that the performance was the only thing that was safe to give. The music was not the performance. That was the distinction she had always held on to. The music was real. Everything else, the image, the composure, the controlled warmth, the managed revelation, was the mechanism that protected the music so it could be real. She had played the music for Cecile. She had not meant to. She had meant to play a few bars, something to fill the silence of the evening, the comfortable domestic silence of a shared kitchen and a shared hour and Cecile reading in the good chair. She had sat down at the piano with no intention of playing anything real and the real thing had come out of her hands anyway, the way it sometimes did when she was tired enough to have let her guard down without noticing. Cecile had been very still throughout. She had not reached for her notebook. Estelle had not played for an audience in the parlor of her own apartment in years. She was fine. The arrangement had 3 weeks left, and then 2 weeks, and then she would be more careful, and things would return to how they had been, and that was the correct and sensible outcome. She went home. She made tea. She did not open the composition notebook. She sat at the piano instead and played 4 bars of something new that she did not write down, and then she stopped, and she closed the lid, and she went to bed. The dinner on Saturday was a success. Cecile wore a green silk collar Estelle had not seen before, an unusual choice, for Cecile, who usually favored more muted details. It worked. It was the kind of detail that made you look twice, which Estelle suspected was not an accident. Cecile had that quality, a poet's instinct for the weight of small choices, and she applied it to her appearance the way she applied it to her work, with care so quiet it only revealed itself in the effect. They spoke easily over dinner, the way they had learned to speak, easily and with a quality of attention that did not require performing for each other, that had stopped being a performance some time ago. About the reading Cecile had attended the week before. About the new record label Rollins was in negotiation with. About a story in the Messenger that had made Cecile laugh out loud in her apartment on a Wednesday morning, which she described in such precise detail that it made Estelle laugh too. The laugh arrived before she could stop it. It always did, with Cecile. Afterward, in the taxicab, in the dark, their hands found each other the way they had learned to, a habit now, or something older than habit. Cecile's fingers were cool from the evening air. Estelle held on. She told herself that she was maintaining the appearance of the arrangement. She thought about Rollins, about Mrs. Patterson's letter. About Miriam Lott's impeccably delivered last clause. She held on. The taxicab moved through the city and she sat with the warmth of Cecile's hand in hers in the dark, 2 feet between them on the seat, and she thought, 3 weeks. 2 weeks. And then the arrangement ends, and she would be more careful, and this, whatever this was, would have been exactly what it was and nothing else. She believed this. She was almost entirely certain she believed this. Outside, Harlem moved and blazed and sounded like itself, and the taxicab turned north, and the dark held them both, and neither of them said a word. Chapter 12, What Odette Knows. Cecile had not meant to go to Odette. She had meant, that Tuesday, to go to the library on 135th, the large reading room on the 2nd floor, where she sometimes spent an afternoon with a stack of other people's books and her notebook, working through whatever it was she was or wasn't writing. She had put on her coat and her hat and taken her bag with the notebook inside it and walked out of the apartment on a route that would have taken her, in 15 minutes, to the library steps. She ended up, instead, in front of the building on 133rd where Odette Crane kept her apartment. She stood on the pavement for a moment and considered this. Then she rang the bell. Odette answered the door in a house dress and with her hair down, which was a version of her that Cecile had not seen before. She took in Cecile's presence without visible surprise, stepped back from the doorway, and said, "Come in. The coffee's fresh." Cecile was learning how Odette operated, with a readiness that had no urgency in it, as if she had been expecting whoever arrived. Not a performance of welcome. Something more like a settled condition. The apartment was warm and slightly dim, with the afternoon light coming in at a slant through net curtains. There was music on a small Victrola in the corner, something with a lot of piano in it that Cecile didn't recognize, and sheet music open on the settee, and 2 coffee cups already on the table. One was clearly Odette's. The other had, Cecile noted, no business being there unless company had been anticipated. She said nothing about this. "Sit down," Odette said, and disappeared into the kitchen. She returned with a cup for Cecile and settled into the armchair across from her, tucking her feet up beneath her in a way that suggested she had no particular plans for the afternoon and had not been interrupted in any. "What happened?" "Nothing happened," Cecile said. Odette raised an eyebrow. "I needed some air," Cecile said. "I was going to the library. I ended up here instead." "I know." Odette poured. "That happens sometimes. People think they're going one place and they arrive somewhere else." She handed Cecile the cup and settled back. "Usually they end up where they needed to go." Cecile held the coffee and looked at the net curtains and the afternoon light and said nothing for a moment. She was aware of the notebook in her bag, its familiar weight, the covers she had been touching compulsively for 3 weeks, the pages inside it that she had not shown to anyone. "How long have you known Estelle?" she asked. Odette considered this with the long, weighted pause that was characteristic of her. Not hesitation. "Wait. Since she was 24, she said. "I was at the same venue. Different bill. We got to talking after the last set one night and kept talking." A small pause. "There was a period when we were not friends, exactly. Something before friends. And then we became friends." Cecile watched her face. She had learned to read silences, and Odette's silences had always been eloquent. The pause around something before friends was its own sentence. "Was it difficult?" Cecile asked. "Becoming friends, after?" Odette looked at her steadily. "You're asking me a more specific question than that." Cecile did not look away. "Yes." There was a beat. Odette uncurled from the chair and reached over to lift the needle from the Victrola, and the room went quiet. Then she settled back and looked at her coffee and appeared to be deciding something. "I'll tell you a story," she said. "It's not about anyone in particular." "All right," Cecile said. "There was a woman I knew," Odette said. "Extraordinary. One of those people who walks into a room and the room reorganizes itself around her, not because she asks it to, but because something in her compels it. The most gifted person I had encountered. Generous with that gift. Not generous with much else." She paused. Cecile did not move. She had learned, very young, that what she was, who she was, had a particular cost in the world. That to exist openly was to offer people ammunition. So she built a different kind of existence. Controlled. Managed. She learned to give people exactly as much of herself as served her and not 1 degree more. A long pause. She was very good at it. Masterful, even. She could be in a room with 100 people all watching her and not one of them would have what she hadn't chosen to give. "That sounds exhausting," Cecile said quietly. "I imagine it was." She didn't show it. She was good at not showing that too. Odette looked up. "The thing about this woman," the particular cruelty of it, is that she was capable of enormous feeling. Not incapable of closeness. Terrified of it. There's a difference. She let that sit for a moment. The people who aren't capable of it are simpler to understand. She wasn't simple. She was someone who wanted, deeply, to be known, and had made a life's work of preventing it. The afternoon light shifted. Somewhere outside, someone was playing piano, a few bars of something, then stopping, then starting again. What happened to her? Cecile asked. Odette tilted her head. In the story? Yes. She found someone, Odette said. Not looking. The opposite of looking. But someone arrived who had a particular quality, patience without agenda. Who watched her without requiring anything from the watching. Who was interested, genuinely, without using the interest as a claim. She paused. That kind of attention is unusual. This woman had never had it before. She'd had admiration, which is a different thing, and she'd had desire, which is a different thing, and she'd had respect, which is a different thing from all of them. A pause. But to be simply observed. Carefully. By someone whose care didn't come with terms. Odette looked at her coffee. She didn't know what to do with it. Cecile was very still. She did what she always did, Odette continued. She began to manage the distance. She pulled back exactly 2 feet, her number, her safe distance, and she waited for the new arrival to ask something of her, because everyone asks something eventually, and when they do she knows how to answer, or how to decline, and either way she is back in control. A pause. The trouble is, this person didn't ask. Cecile looked at her hands around the coffee cup. She knows how to be wanted, Odette said. Her voice was gentle. She is very, very good at being wanted. She has practiced it for years, because being wanted is something she can manage. She decides how much to show, how much to withhold, where to stand in the light. She paused. She has not yet learned how to be loved. It's different. You can't manage it. It doesn't ask permission. It just arrives, and either you let it or you don't, and if you don't, if you keep the distance, you are protected, and you are alone, and you have successfully prevented the only thing that was going to be any real use to you. The room was very quiet. Outside, the piano began again and played through to the end of the phrase this time. Someone is going to have to go first, Odette said. Cecile looked at her. Odette looked back with the particular expression she had, reading something just behind the eyes. That's not a rhetorical observation, Cecile said. No, Odette agreed. It isn't. A long silence. Cecile set down her cup and looked at the net curtains and the light and thought about the parlor, and the house dress, and the window cracked to let in the February air, and the music that had moved through 3 keys and doubled back on itself and then opened into something so lucent she'd had to look away from it. She'd looked at her own hands, she remembered, and thought, I have been writing about this sound for 17 years and I did not know it was a sound. She thought about the 2 feet of careful distance and how deliberate it had become. How she could measure it now. She's pulling back, Cecile said. Not a question. Yes. That's what this is. The distance. Yes. Odette's voice was not unkind. She does it when something becomes too real. When she can feel that the thing has gone past the point where she can control what it costs her. She tidies herself up. She decides, very rationally, that it would be better for everyone if she simply returned to the previous arrangement. A pause. She is wrong. She has been wrong about this many times. She will continue to be wrong about it until someone refuses to let her. Cecile looked at her for a long moment. Are you telling me I need to do something? She asked. I'm telling you a story about a woman I used to know, Odette said. What you do with it is your own affair. The warmth in her voice was unmistakable. So was the care. Cecile picked up her coffee cup again, though it was nearly cold now, and held it with both hands, and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, There's a reading. The Crisis is doing a literary evening. February 14th. Odette raised an eyebrow. Dorothea gave them my name, Cecile said. They want new work. And you have new work. It wasn't a question. Cecile understood that Odette could read it on her, whatever was visible in her face, in the way she'd been carrying herself for the past 3 weeks. I have something, Cecile said. I'd been writing it for 3 weeks without understanding what it was. She paused. I understand it now. I just don't know if I'm brave enough to read it in public. Odette considered this. Is it true? She asked. Yes. Is it honest in the way that your other published work isn't? Cecile looked at her. You've read my published work. I have. It's extraordinary. It's also careful. A pause, with no cruelty in it, only precision. The kind of careful that comes from a person who has been telling the truth in code for so long she's half forgotten its code. Cecile thought about Estelle saying, in the middle of an argument she hadn't entirely meant to start, they are beautiful. Not honest. And the distinction had landed the way precise things landed, without drama, just wait. It's honest, she said. More honest than anything I've published. Odette nodded once, as if this settled something. Then you're brave enough, she said. You wouldn't have written it if you weren't. Cecile stood up. She hadn't planned to leave yet, but her body had made the decision before she had, the way bodies sometimes did when they knew something was resolved. I should, she began. Yes, Odette said. She was already reaching for the Victrola. Cecile put on her coat. At the door she paused and looked back. The woman in your story, she said. The one with the particular quality. The patience without agenda. Odette looked at her. Did she go first? Odette was quiet for a moment. Then, very carefully, I think she's about to. Cecile left. She walked for a while without going anywhere in particular. February in Harlem was cold and specific, the particular cold of the city, which had an edge to it that was nothing like Philadelphia's, a brightness to it, the smell of other people's coal fires and food and the sharp clean of the river somewhere west. She walked north on Lenox and then east, and she thought about Odette's story and about the 2 feet of careful distance and about the fact that she had 3 weeks left and did not know what to do with them. She had the poem. The one in her notebook, written in pieces over 3 weeks, on the backs of programs, on the margins of other work, in the small hours when she heard the distant trumpet from 2 blocks away and sat at her kitchen table and wrote towards something she was only beginning to admit was an address. She had not titled it. She had not shown it to anyone. She had barely read it to herself. She turned west and walked without destination for another quarter of an hour, and she thought about what Odette had not quite said and what she herself had not quite said, and how the most important conversations were always conducted in this register, sideways, in the language of almost, where the real thing was said at an angle so that both parties could decline to have heard it if they chose. She had heard it. She had been writing it, apparently, for 17 years. She walked home. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat at the kitchen table in the particular gray light of the late afternoon and opened her notebook and read the poem from the beginning, all the way through, for the first time without stopping. It took 7 minutes. When she finished, the room was quieter than it had been. She picked up her pen. She kept writing. It was Auguste Beaumont who found her there. This was not unusual. Auguste had adopted the habit, in the past month, of appearing at Cecile's apartment at inconvenient times with inconvenient questions and coffee, apparently having inherited his sister's capacity for showing up and occupying a room without any sign of having required permission to do so. Cecile had, initially, found this alarming. She had since come to understand that Auguste operated with a cheerful, undisguised affection that was so entirely itself that it didn't require anything in return, which was a quality she found, increasingly, very restful. He knocked this time, which was unusual. Cecile let him in. He came in carrying coffee from the counter on 131st and wearing a green waistcoat that was, even by his standards, remarkable. That is an extraordinary garment, Cecile said. It is, he agreed, without defensiveness. He looked at her notebook, open on the table, and at the 3 or 4 sheets of paper covered in her handwriting that she had not moved in time. Working? Yes. He settled into the chair across from her and did not offer to leave, which was also characteristic. He poured coffee for her without asking, set a cup at her elbow, and looked at the table with the particular expression that suggested he was about to say something she hadn't asked for. "What?" Cecile said. "Nothing," August said. "I'm thinking." "You look alarming when you think." "Stell says that too." He grinned, briefly. Then the grin settled into something more considered. "I saw her yesterday." Cecile looked at her notebook. "At August's," he said. "Our mother. She comes by on Sundays. We had a late dinner." He paused. "She was, I don't know. Careful, is the word. More careful than usual. Which for Estelle is saying something." Cecile said nothing. "She didn't ask about you," August said. "Which she usually does. She usually asks how you are, in the way she asks about things she's interested in, which is the same way she asks about a new instrument or an interesting chord, like she's being very objective and academic and everyone in the room can see through it." He picked up his coffee. "She didn't ask yesterday. Maybe she already knew. Maybe." He looked at her. "Or maybe she was working very hard not to ask, which is different." Cecile set down her pen. "She does this," August said. He was not unkind. He was very direct, in the way of people who love their subject and therefore require accuracy about them. When something matters, she tidies it. Gets very organized about it. Very composed. He paused. "When she was 19 and our father died and she was holding everything together for our mother, she was the calmest person I had ever seen. I was 12. I thought she was just strong. Later I understood she was terrified and the calm was the thing she was doing instead of falling apart." He looked at the coffee cup in his hands. "She's been calm like that lately." The afternoon light had shifted. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of the street below. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what I'm talking about," August said. He said it directly, without apology. "I've never seen her watch anyone the way she watches you. I have literally never, in 31 years of being her brother, seen her look at someone the way she looks at you." A pause. "It's a little alarming, honestly. The quantity of it." Cecile looked at him. "I'm not asking you to do anything with that information," he said. "I'm just telling you." He smiled, a little. "She's not going to say it herself. I know her. She'll decide that the arrangement ends and that's that, and she'll put everything back where it was and be very composed about it, and then I'll have to watch her be composed for the next 5 years, which is not what I want for her." "August," Cecile said carefully. "I know," he said. "It's not my business. I'm the younger brother and it's definitely not my business." He didn't look abashed by this. "I'm telling you anyway." Cecile looked at the notebook on the table. At the poem inside it, addressed in the direction it had always been addressed, now that she could read the handwriting clearly. "She has a last set," Cecile said. "At the end of the month. She told me. She's doing something new." August nodded. "I know. She's been working on it for weeks." He paused. "She wouldn't tell me what it was about." "No," Cecile said. "She wouldn't." A small silence. August looked at her with the watchful eyes he shared with his sister, and something in his expression, the quiet, the waiting, was very like her. "Go to the last set," he said. "That's all." "I was going to," Cecile said. August nodded. He finished his coffee and stood, and pulled his extraordinary waistcoat down with a small, satisfied motion, and moved toward the door. "She's a good person," he said, at the door. Not sentimental, factual. The way he said the true things. She's a good person who has gotten so used to protecting herself that she sometimes needs someone to remind her that she doesn't have to. He looked at Cecile. "You've been doing that. I don't know if you know that you've been doing it." He left. Cecile sat for a long time at the kitchen table with her notebook open and the afternoon light going down around her and the street below conducting its usual ordinary life. Then she reached for her pen. She kept writing. Chapter 13, The Last Set. She had seen Estelle perform before. That was the premise of the whole arrangement. Cecile, the respectable poet companion, present at Estelle's public appearances, visible and appropriate and useful. She had stood in more rooms than she could count and watched Estelle walk to the bandstand and become whatever the room required her to become, the architect of its atmosphere, the center of its gravity, the particular kind of brilliant that made people feel, simply by proximity, that they were part of something that mattered. She had thought she knew what it was to watch her. She had not known anything. The last set of the month was on a Tuesday, midnight, and the room had the quality it always got at that hour, the well-dressed crowd gone home, what remained being the musicians and the serious listeners and the people who simply had nowhere better to be, which was to say the room had become entirely itself. The lights were lower. The smoke was thicker. The air had the particular density of a space where real things were happening rather than things being performed in order to suggest that real things were happening. The arrangement had one day and some hours remaining. Cecile sat at a table near the back, not against the wall. She had learned in the weeks since October that Estelle could find her anywhere in a room, that it took approximately 4 seconds after she walked in for Estelle's attention to move across the crowd and locate her, and that the sensation of being located was something she had stopped pretending to be neutral about. She had chosen the table carefully without examining why she chose it. She had her notebook in her bag. She had not taken it out. The room filled in around her with the specific warm noise of an audience in the process of becoming one. Conversations in chairs and glasses and the musicians beginning to tune, which was its own kind of sound, preliminary and impatient. Cecile ordered coffee and sat with it and watched the stage. Estelle came out at 20-1. She was wearing garnet. Not the deep, saturated garnet of a formal evening, this was the dark garnet of a woman who had gotten dressed without thinking about it, which meant she had gotten dressed thinking about the music instead, which Cecile had learned to read as a sign that something real was about to happen. She moved through the room with the unhurried authority that was simply the way she moved, and she did not look for Cecile immediately. She spoke to the bartender, she spoke to her musicians, she looked out at the room with the surveying, inventory-taking look she always had before she played. Then she looked. Her eyes found Cecile in approximately 4 seconds. Something happened in her face, very small, very quick. Something that was not for the room. She looked away again immediately, turned to her musicians, counted them off, and began. Cecile was glad she had not taken out the notebook. The piece was structured, Cecile understood gradually, like the experience of wanting something you have not let yourself name. She did not know the title yet. She learned it later, arrangement in blue and leaving, and when she did, the pieces of it rearranged themselves in her mind into a shape she recognized. The arrangement that had been and was about to stop being, and the leaving that was not a departure but the kind of leaving that was present before it happened, the way winter is present in October. But that was later. While it was happening she only knew the music. The first movement was formal. Precise. A melody so contained it seemed to be measuring its own distance, controlled in a way that was itself beautiful, the beauty of a line drawn with extreme care, without error, the kind of discipline that is its own kind of expression. Cecile thought, this is a person at the beginning of a thing, when everything is still managed. When the rules are clear and the rules are working. Then the second movement. And the containment began, incrementally, to fail. Not dramatically. Not catastrophically. A note held one beat longer than it should. A chord that moved toward resolution and then didn't resolve, stopped just before, hung in the air, left open. It was so subtle that someone not paying close attention might not have caught it. Cecile caught it. She had spent the better part of 7 weeks paying attention to the ways Estelle said things without saying them, and she recognized this, the form holding, the feeling pressing against the form from the inside. The third movement. Cecile's throat closed. She could not have explained it in language, which was perhaps the point of it, which was perhaps what music was for, to say the things that lived in the body before the mind had words for them. The third movement was the sound of wanting something you have not yet let yourself have. Of holding a feeling at exactly 2 feet, just out of reach, not because you don't have it but because having it completely would require you to be someone who doesn't keep their distance. It was the sound of the space between a person and the thing they love when they have decided, very carefully, not to close that space. Cecile had been living inside that sound for 17 years. She recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting on an envelope, not by reading it, just by the shape of it, the particular slant, the pressure of the pen. She thought, she wrote this about me. And then, immediately, the corrective, no, she wrote this about herself. And then, after a moment, she wrote this about us. The same thing, maybe. The same longing from 2 different addresses. The 4th movement resolved. Quietly. Incompletely. Not with finality but with the particular quality of a door that has been left slightly open, with light coming through the gap, and no promise about what was on the other side. Cecile thought, this is honest. This is the most honest thing. It does not pretend to know the ending. When it was over, the room was still for a long moment, the particular stillness of people who have been moved and have not yet resumed being a crowd. Then the applause broke over them. Cecile sat with her hands in her lap and did not applaud. She watched Estelle accept the room's attention with the grace she had built over a lifetime, the slight acknowledgement of the bandstand, the hand on the piano, the composed and generous look she gave the room, and she looked at Estelle's hands, which were not quite steady. She could see it from the back of the room. Trembling, slightly, at the fingertips. She thought, she wrote that and then she stood there and played it in front of a room of people and it cost her something she will not acknowledge that it cost. She thought, I have been writing the same thing in a different language. She stood up. The room filled back in with sound, the pianist starting a standard, people moving toward the bar and toward each other and toward the particular resumption of ordinary life that followed the extraordinary. Cecile did not move toward the door. She stood at her table and waited, and the room thinned slowly the way rooms thin after last sets, and Estelle spoke to her drummer and then to the pianist and then looked up again. She saw that Cecile was still there. Something moved across her face. Something that was complicated and small and that Cecile now had enough accumulated observation to read. She had not expected this. She had perhaps hoped for it and decided against hoping for it and was confronting the fact of it with the combination of relief and alarm that hope tended to produce in people who had taught themselves not to have it. She said something to the drummer. She came down from the bandstand. She crossed the room. She stopped 2 feet away. This was her habit. Cecile knew it now the way she knew the chord that wouldn't resolve, as a choice, a careful architectural decision, a distance maintained with intention. 2 feet. The safe distance. The place from which she could retreat without having committed to anything. You stayed, Estelle said. Her voice was very low. The room was mostly empty, the bartender wiping down glasses, 1 or 2 musicians still packing their cases. The air smelled of bourbon and cigarette smoke and old wood and February coming in cold under the door. I stayed, Cecile said. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that had weight. That piece, Cecile said. The new one. Estelle looked at her steadily. Her face was composed, the composure that Auguste had described, the composure of a woman doing a thing instead of falling apart. Yes. How long have you been writing it? The pause was its own answer before she gave the other one. Estelle's inventory, adding things up, deciding what to offer. Longer than this, she said. I had the shape of it. I didn't know what it was about until recently. Cecile waited. What is it about? She asked. A longer pause. You know what it's about, Estelle said. Cecile looked at her. Estelle, who had let 1,000 rooms see exactly as much of her as served her. Estelle, who moved through the world like a woman who had already accounted for every exit. Estelle, standing in an empty room at 1 in the morning with her hands not quite steady, offering nothing managed, no performance, no calibrated warmth, no careful distance beyond the distance of the 2 feet she had left between them. Just her. Just this. I have a reading, Cecile said. February 14th. The crisis is doing a literary evening at the 135th Street Library. Something shifted in Estelle's expression. A small thing, a tightening. You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. Cecile looked at her own hands for a moment and then looked back. I've been writing something. For 3 weeks, in the margins of things, at odd hours, without understanding what it was. She paused. I understand it now. What it is. Who it's for. Estelle did not move. The arrangement ends in 2 days, Cecile said. I know that. I'm not asking you to renegotiate it. She stopped. Started again, more carefully. She had the poet's instinct for the right word, and she was trying to find it, to say the exact true thing without ornament. I want you to come and hear me. The way I've heard you tonight. The way I've been hearing you, not just the music, but you. She looked at Estelle. I want to be seen. By you. I think I've wanted that since the first night I watched you play, and I didn't have a name for it, and now I do. So I'm telling you. The room was very quiet. The bartender had gone into the back. The last musician had finished packing and gone. They were alone in the room, and the silence between them had the quality of something that had been waiting a long time to be this specific. Estelle looked at her. Really looked, not the measuring look, not the inventory, but the other one. The look that arrived without calculation, the one that Cecile had caught occasionally in unguarded moments, and that meant, she understood now, that the management had briefly failed. Estelle was looking at her the way you looked at something you had been trying not to look at directly for fear of what the looking would confirm. Cecile looked back. She was aware, in the way you became aware of things in moments like this, of exactly how much she had staked on this conversation. The poem in her notebook, with its unmistakable pronoun and its address to a she who did not need to be named. The arrangement ending in 2 days. The fact that what came after the arrangement depended, in some significant way, on what happened in the next 30 seconds in this empty room that smelled like winter and bourbon and old wood. She was also aware that she was not afraid. She had thought she would be afraid. She had been afraid for weeks, of the poem, of what it meant, of what it would cost to read it in public, of Estelle's careful distance and Estelle's composed withdrawal and the elaborate architecture of Estelle's self-protection, which was real and built for real reasons and would not come down easily. But she was standing here and she was not afraid. She was, instead, very clear. The clarity of a person who has arrived at the thing they have been moving toward without knowing it, and recognizes it. What time, Estelle said, is the reading? Cecile heard, under the question, what the question was not saying. The arrangement ends in 2 days. After which I had intended to withdraw, to become more careful, to return to how things were. I had a plan. The plan is still technically available. And yet. 7 in the evening, Cecile said. 3rd row, if you want to be seen. Further back if you don't. Estelle was very still for a moment. 3rd row, she said. Not a question. Cecile nodded once. Estelle reached out, slowly, without rushing it, giving Cecile every moment of a moment to change her mind, and took her hand. Her fingers were warm. Calloused at the tips, the way Cecile had catalogued weeks ago in a taxicab in the dark, the way she had noticed and not let herself notice the noticing. Estelle held on. 1 foot apart now, not 2. The habitual careful distance, finally relinquished. I'll be there, Estelle said. Outside, February was moving through the city with its cold and its purpose, and inside the empty room the last of the night's music had gone quiet. Cecile held Estelle's hand and thought about the poem in her notebook and about 17 years of longing addressed to the wrong grammar, and about a door left slightly open with light on the other side. She thought, I could have known this longer. And then, underneath it, different, I know it now. She held on. Neither of them said anything else. The silence was entirely sufficient. This was the moment. Not an ending. There were no disasters here, no revelations that destroyed things, no dramatic collapse. Just a door, quietly closing behind her, on the person she had been when she did not know what she was. Just the particular, irrevocable clarity of a woman who has named the thing and cannot unname it. She was in love with Estelle Beaumont. She had been in love with Estelle Beaumont since she sat in the back of a club 7 weeks ago and felt something in her chest rearrange itself and wrote one line in her notebook in the dark: "I am watching someone be entirely themselves and I am in ruins." She had 1 day left before the reading. She had a poem to finish. She was not afraid. She was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely herself. Chapter 14, the night before. She came home from the club at 2 in the morning and did not sleep. This was not unusual. She had not slept well in weeks, not since the night of the parlor performance, since the music had moved through 3 keys and opened into something she had no name for, and she had sat with her notebook closed in her lap and thought, "I have been writing toward this and did not know it." She had grown accustomed, over those weeks, to the particular quality of the small hours in her apartment on 133rd Street, the street quieting by degrees, the coal stove ticking, the window rattling slightly in its frame when the wind came off the river, and her own handwriting covering page after page in the notebook she kept telling herself she would stop filling. Tonight she set the notebook on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. She had 1 day. Not 1 day until the arrangement ended. The arrangement had ended this evening, technically, on the calendar, though neither she nor Estelle had marked it. Not 1 day until something was decided. It had been decided in an empty club at 1 in the morning when Estelle reached out and took her hand and said, "I'll be there," which was not a renegotiation of the arrangement but was, unmistakably, something. 1 day until she stood in the 135th Street Library and read in public what she had written in private. 1 day until she told the truth without code for the first time in her life. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table. She opened the notebook. The poem was 9 stanzas. She had written it in fragments, the first 2 stanzas the night after Dorothea announced the reading, written fast, with the urgency of someone putting down something before it could become cowardly, the middle stanzas in pieces across 2 weeks, on the backs of programs and on a bill from the dry goods store and in the margins of a draft of another poem that had nothing to do with any of this, the final stanzas in one long sitting 3 nights ago, after August left and the apartment went quiet and she had sat at the kitchen table in the fading afternoon light and simply written until the thing was done. She had read it all the way through only once, before August arrived. She had not read it since. Now she read it again. It was a poem about watching. About the particular violence of watching someone be entirely themselves, the way it shows you the shape of your own held breath, the outline of a longing you have been carrying so long you had mistaken it for something else. For ambition. For art. For the abstract and literary ache that poets were supposed to have, that made them interesting at dinner parties and produced exquisite, careful work that was praised and published, and that was, she understood now, the truth told in code so thorough she had half convinced herself the code was the real thing. It was a poem about 17 years. She had started feeling things she could not name when she was 12 years old. A girl in New Orleans with a habit of watching women the way other girls watched men, which she had not understood as watching at all, which she had filed away under intensity, under sensitivity, under the sensitivity that people said was the mark of a writer and that she had used, gratefully, as an explanation for everything that refused to fit the shape of the life she was expected to want. She had been 12, and then 15, and then 18 and in Philadelphia, and then 22 and married to a man she genuinely liked and could not make herself love in the way the word was supposed to mean. She had been 25 and publishing poems in The Messenger and The Crisis that were exquisite and that her editors called emotionally sophisticated and that were, she understood now, the work of a woman writing as close to the truth as she dared and no closer. She had been 28 and living in a marriage that fit like a coat, one size wrong, not cruel, not unlivable, just wrong in the particular way of things that have never been right and have simply been endured out of a failure of self-knowledge. She had been 29, on a train from Philadelphia, telling herself she knew exactly what she was doing. She read the poem to the end. In the last stanza she had written, and I have given the pronoun a name / though the name is not yet in this poem / the name is in the room where I first heard / the sound I had been writing toward. The pronoun was she. It was unmistakable. It was addressed, without equivocation, to a woman. She set the poem down and sat for a while with the weight of it. This was the grief. Not the grief of the arrangement ending, the arrangement had become something else entirely, a word she did not yet have, but something. Not the grief of what might happen after the reading, of the risk of it, of what Harlem might make of a poet who published a love poem addressed to a woman in the pages of the Crisis in 1926 without changing the pronoun. Those were fears, not grief. Grief was different. Grief was the specific sorrow of reckoning with what you had missed. She thought about the years. The 12-year-old girl who had watched a woman walk across a room and felt something she had no name for and had filed it away carefully and moved on. The 18-year-old who had written her first poem about longing, published, years later, praised for its restraint, which was to say praised for the precision of its concealment. The 22-year-old who had stood at an altar and said the words with genuine intention, meaning every word, and not one of those words had been a lie except for the larger lie underneath them, that this was what longing was. That this was who she was longing for. Fletcher had not been wrong. He had been the wrong answer to the wrong question, and she had loved him as well as she could, and she had been writing poems about someone else without knowing who that someone was or that she was writing them at all. That was the grief. The years of it. The particular wasted quality of time spent in the wrong life, not through cruelty or cowardice but through ignorance, through not having the map, through being a woman in a world that had no language for what she was except the language of wrong and shameful and not to be spoken of, which meant she had spent 30 years learning to not speak of it until she had nearly succeeded in not thinking of it either. I could have known this longer. She had thought it in the empty club, holding Estelle's hand. It was true and she needed to let it be true and not make it smaller than it was. She sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. on February the 13th and let it be true. The grief was real. She did not try to resolve it. She let it live in the room with her, this apartment, this kitchen, the coal stove and the rattling window and the notebook open on the table, and she sat with it the way you sat with real things, not to fix them but to have them be witnessed, even if only by yourself. After a while, it became quieter. Not gone. Real things didn't go. But quieter, the way grief went quiet when you stopped fighting it and simply allowed it to occupy the space it was going to occupy regardless. And underneath it, underneath the weight of the years and the wrong grammar and the life spent in the wrong story, underneath all of that was something else. Something that had been there since October. Something that had been there, she understood now, longer than October, as long as any of the rest of it, waiting. She was here. She was 29 years old, which was late by some measures and early by others, and she was in Harlem in February 1926 with a notebook full of the truest writing she had ever done and a woman, a specific and particular and wholly extraordinary woman, who had taken her hand in an empty room and said I'll be there. She had the poem. She had the reading. She had one day. She picked up her pen. The 9th stanza was not right. She had known it for 3 days without saying so to herself, the kind of knowing you keep quiet because changing it will require you to look more directly at the thing you are saying than you have been willing to look. The last stanza was hedged. Not dishonest, she had been too tired for dishonesty by the time she reached the end of it, but soft at the edges. The language that came naturally when she was afraid, the beautiful and slightly blurred language that her editors loved and that meant almost everything and stopped just short of anything. She crossed it out. She sat for a while with the blank space where it had been. Then she wrote, there is a woman in the 3rd row. / she has not moved. / she has been still as held breath / since the poem began. / and I have been, all my life, / addressing this page to her, / the she the poem circled / without landing, / not because I did not know / but because knowing / cost something I did not yet know how to pay. / I know how now. She read it back. It was direct in the way that true things were direct. It did not flinch. It said she 3 times and it said the 3rd row and anyone in the room who knew that Estelle Beaumont was a woman who favored the 3rd row would understand exactly what it was about, and anyone who did not would understand, at minimum, that it was about a woman, which was itself the truth that needed to be said. She had spent 30 years writing around this. She was done writing around it. She copied the stanza into the clean draft. She read the poem from the beginning to the end one more time, and this time she did not stop. She did not look away from any of it. She let every line be what it was. When she finished, she set the pen down. The apartment was very quiet. The street was quiet. The coal stove ticked. The window rattled once in the February wind and then was still. Cecile sat at her kitchen table in the particular silence of a woman who has arrived at something, not an ending, not a conclusion, but the solid ground of the thing you have been walking toward without knowing you were walking, and she was not performing anything, not for herself and not for the empty room, and she was not afraid. This was the choice. Not to win anything. Not to guarantee the outcome or secure the future or know what happened after she stepped away from the podium tomorrow night. The choice was simpler and more difficult than any of those, to be honest. To stand in a room and say the true thing without the code. To be, for the first time in public, entirely herself. She had made this choice before she knew she was making it, the night Dorothea set the cream card on the kitchen table, and she had said all right before she knew what she was agreeing to. She had been making it in increments ever since, every evening with Estelle where she stopped performing and simply was, every page of the notebook she filled without asking herself if it was safe, the night she had sat in the good chair and watched and not reached for her notebook because some things did not need to be translated into language, they needed to simply be lived. She had been becoming herself for months. Tomorrow she was going to say so in public. She closed the notebook. She washed the teacup. She stood at the kitchen window for a moment and looked out at 127th Street in the February dark, the street lamp, the empty pavement, the faint smudge of light from the elevated tracks a few blocks west, and she thought about Estelle, who was somewhere in this city right now, in her own apartment perhaps, or still at the club, and who had said third row, which was its own kind of poem. She went to bed. She did not sleep for some time, but she lay still and let the dark be what it was, and she thought about the reading and she thought about Estelle and she thought about the poem in the notebook on the kitchen table, finished now, complete, addressed to its correct and only address. She was not performing anything. She was not afraid. She was, already, herself. That was enough. Whatever happened tomorrow, that was enough, and it was more than she had had on any morning of the last 30 years, and she would not trade it. She closed her eyes. Outside, February moved through the city. Inside, on 127th Street, a woman lay in the dark and was entirely herself and was not afraid, and waited for morning to arrive. Chapter 15, Some Poems Aren't Meant to Be Finished Alone. February 14th arrived the way significant days tended to arrive, ordinary at the edges and strange at the center. Cecile woke at 8. The light in the apartment had the flat, gray quality of a Harlem winter morning, not beautiful, but honest. She could hear the street below already in motion, a milk cart, voices, the elevated several blocks west grinding through a curve. She lay still for a moment and listened and thought, today. She made coffee. She ate toast. She read the poem one more time, standing at the kitchen counter in her house dress, and it said what it said, and she did not change anything. Dorothea arrived at noon, without warning, which was her custom. She came in carrying pastries from the bakery on 134th and set them on the table and looked at Cecile with the appraising eye of a woman who was checking for damage and finding less than she expected. "You slept," Dorothea said. It was partly an accusation. "Some," Cecile said. "You look calm." "I am calm." Dorothea sat down and examined her for another moment. Then she opened the pastry box and selected one with the decisiveness of a woman who had accepted the situation. "Well," she said. "That's alarming. You thought I'd be a wreck. I thought you'd have scratched out half the poem by now and rewritten it in the safe version and spent the morning trying to convince yourself the safe version was also honest." She took a bite. "I had arguments prepared." Cecile looked at her. "I didn't." "I can see that." Dorothea looked at the closed notebook on the counter, then back at Cecile. "Will she be there?" Cecile poured coffee and set a cup in front of her. "She said she would." Dorothea was quiet for a moment. This was unusual enough that Cecile noticed it. "Third row," Dorothea said. "Third row." Another silence. Dorothea drank her coffee and looked at the table and had the expression she sometimes had when she was deciding whether to say the true thing or the kind thing. She almost always landed on true. "I'm glad," she said. Quietly, without preamble. "Whatever happens tonight. I'm glad you're doing this." A pause. "You've been careful for a long time. It looked very expensive." Cecile looked at her. "Don't cry," Dorothea said. "You've got 6 hours and you'll ruin your face." Cecile laughed, which was the correct response, and which Dorothea had intended. They ate the pastries. They talked about the crisis editor, a man named Crawford who had been delightful about the evening and had sent Cecile a note the week before expressing enthusiasm for new work, and about the other poets on the program, and about the logistics of the room. Dorothea had been to the 135th Street Library twice for events and had strong opinions about the acoustics, which she expressed without reservation. Cecile listened and was grateful for the ordinariness of it, the coffee cups and the pastry box, and Dorothea's voice filling the apartment with its usual purposeful warmth. At 2 o'clock Dorothea stood up, pulled on her coat, and paused at the door. "You know what I've always thought about your published work," she said. "You've said." "I've said it was beautiful." Dorothea looked at her. "I meant it. I also always thought it was missing the last thing. The thing that would make it true instead of just beautiful." She adjusted her collar. "Tonight you're going to read the last thing." She left. Cecile stood in the empty apartment for a moment. Then she went to her closet and began, with care, to get dressed. She chose a dress the color of dark bronze, not festive, not formal, something in between, the kind of thing she had worn to the readings where she had been good and careful and praised. But she added, at the collar, a brooch she had owned for years and rarely worn, a small spray of jet and silver that had been her grandmother's, that she had kept in its box for occasions she had never quite felt were sufficient. She pinned it on and looked in the glass. She looked like herself. That was all she required of this evening. To walk into that room and read those words and be herself while she did it, without the code, without the careful blurring at the edges. She picked up the notebook. She put on her coat. She went. The 135th Street Library in February smelled like paper and old wood and the particular dry warmth of a room that had been heated for an occasion. It was a room Cecile loved. She had spent afternoons in the reading room upstairs and had always found in it the quality of a space that took language seriously, that had been built around the understanding that words mattered and deserved a proper house. The main room had been arranged with chairs, 40 of them, perhaps, in rows facing a small podium near the windows. By the time Cecile arrived at 6:30, the room was already filling. She recognized some faces, the 2 women who wrote for the Messenger, a young poet named Harrison she had met at the Savoy, Crawford from the Crisis hovering near the door with the proprietary satisfaction of a man who had organized something well. She spoke to him briefly. He was pleased. He had received 3 more inquiries from readers about the evening since it was announced. "We're hoping to make it a series," he said. "Quarterly. If tonight goes well, and I believe it will, the library has agreed to host." "That's wonderful," Cecile said. She did not look toward the chairs. She went to speak to the other poets, a woman named May Fletcher who read formal verse with a precision Cecile admired, and a young man, new to Harlem from Georgia, who was visibly terrified and to whom Cecile said something she hoped was useful. Then Crawford called them to the podium area for a brief word about the order, and Cecile listened and noted her place in the program, third, which would give her the weight of the evening behind her, and looked up, finally, at the room. It was nearly full. Dorothea was in the back row, as promised. She had taken off her hat and set it on the chair beside her. She caught Cecile's eye and raised one eyebrow, which was her version of encouragement. Cecile looked at the 3rd row. Estelle was there. She was there in a coat the color of midnight, the good coat, the one she wore to things that mattered, and she was sitting very still, with her hands in her lap, and she was watching the door. She had arrived early, Cecile understood. She had found the 3rd row and she had sat down in it and she had waited. Something moved through Cecile's chest, not fear, not exactly. The particular feeling of a person who has been holding something tightly for a long time and has just felt the grip begin to release. Estelle found her across the room. Their eyes met. Nothing visible happened. Cecile did not move, Estelle did not move. But something passed between them, wordless and specific, the language they had been developing for months without calling it that, the language of proximity and attention and the things left unremarked in taxicabs in the dark. Cecile inclined her head, slightly. Estelle, across the room, was very still, and her face was doing the unguarded thing, the thing Cecile had learned to wait for, the look that meant the management had briefly, deliberately, been set aside. The room filled around them. Crawford called the evening to order. May Fletcher read first, 3 poems, with precision and evident joy. The audience was warm. The young man from Georgia read second, his terror audible in the first line and resolving by the third, the way it always did when you gave yourself to the work, and the room gave him what rooms gave: courage, attention, and then, after, its approval. Then Crawford introduced Cecile. She walked to the podium. The room was warm and close and smelled like paper. She set her notebook on the stand and looked out at 40 people looking back at her, and she found, in the third row, the one face that was entirely still, that was watching her the way she had watched Estelle play, not as an audience, but as a witness. She began. The first poem was The Cartography of Small Griefs, her most recent published work, the one Miriam Lott had referenced with her impeccable timing. She had read it many times. She read it now with her full attention, because it deserved it, because it was good work even if it was not yet the truest work, and the room received it the way it always did, warmly, with appreciation for the craft. The second poem was an older one, Still Life, November, that she had published 3 years ago and that her editors had cited as the best thing she had written. She read it cleanly, and the room was quiet and attentive, and she thought, this was the best of what I could do before I knew what I was doing. Then she looked up. She looked at her notebook, at the date written at the top of the third poem where a title should have been, the date of the first night she had watched Estelle play, the night in October when she had sat in the back of a club and felt something in her chest rearrange itself and had written, in the dark, the single line that had become this poem's first line. She had never titled it. She had been trying to decide for 3 weeks. She knew now. This last piece, she said, to the warm small room, is new. Her voice was steady. She was not entirely steady, but the voice was, and that was sufficient. I'm not certain. It's finished. She paused. I've come to believe that some poems aren't meant to be finished alone. She read. The room was very quiet. She had not known, until she read it aloud in public, how clear it was. On the page, in the privacy of her kitchen table, it had seemed possible that it was still coded, that the metaphors were sufficient cover, that the longing could still read as general, as literary, as the abstract ache of a poet rather than the specific ache of a woman who loved a woman and had spent 30 years not knowing how to say so. Reading it aloud in a room of 40 people, she understood that there was no cover left. The poem said what it said. The pronoun was she. The address was unmistakable. The last stanza put a woman in the third row and said plainly that this page had always been addressed to her. She did not flinch from any of it. She read every line the way she had written it, directly, without the careful blurring, without the beautiful hedging that had made her work safe and praised and, she understood now, incomplete. She read it the way Estelle had played the third movement, at the cost of something she had decided to pay. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. She looked up. Dorothea, in the back row, began to clap. The room followed, warmly, fully, the kind of applause that meant the thing had been received. She heard Crawford, to her left, make a sound of satisfaction. She heard, somewhere in the middle rows, a woman exhale as if she had been holding her breath. She looked at the third row. Estelle was not clapping. She was sitting with her hands in her lap and her face doing something Cecile had never seen it do. Not the composure. Not the controlled warmth. Not the careful calibration of what was shown and what was kept. Open. Fully open. The architecture of a woman who has spent a lifetime controlling what people see, and has, in this moment, set that entirely aside. Her eyes were bright. She was not looking away. Cecile stepped back from the podium. She was aware, distantly, of people speaking to her. Crawford, warm and slightly overwhelmed, pressing her hand and saying something about the crisis that she would remember later. May Fletcher, who said, "That last one," and then stopped and simply nodded, which was the best thing anyone said to her all evening. The young man from Georgia, who looked at her with the expression of someone who had recognized something and was still working out what it meant for him. She answered. She was present. She shook hands and received the evening's warmth and meant every word of her gratitude, because the room had been generous and she had asked something real of it and it had given something real back. But she was watching, from the corner of her attention, Estelle, who had stood, slowly, in the third row, who had buttoned her midnight coat, who was standing at the edge of the room while the crowd thinned around her, still, with the patience of a woman who was very good at waiting and had decided, tonight, to use that quality in a different direction. The last guest shook Cecile's hand. Crawford turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the lamp near the door. The librarian moved toward the chairs. Estelle crossed the floor. She moved the way she always moved, unhurried, deliberate, as if she had never been in a hurry in her life, and she came to where Cecile was standing and she stopped. Not 2 feet away. 1. The distance she had relinquished in the empty club, the distance she had maintained, Cecile understood now, not out of indifference but out of the most careful and particular form of wanting, the wanting of a woman who was afraid to want too much. "Now I've seen you," Estelle said. Her voice was very quiet. The librarian was folding chairs at the far end of the room, not watching, which was a kindness. Cecile looked at her. All of her, the extraordinary face that she had been cataloguing since October, the eyes that measured and considered and that were not measuring now, not considering, just present. The hands at her sides, still. The midnight coat. The single jet black comb in her close-cropped hair, which Cecile had noticed the first night and had been noticing ever since without letting herself know that she was. Was it terrible? Cecile asked. Her voice did not quite shake. Estelle looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "In the way that true things are." She reached out, slowly, without haste, giving Cecile every opportunity to step back, which Cecile had no intention of using, and took her hand. Her fingers were warm, calloused at the tips. The hand of a woman who made things with it, who built music out of it, who had played in the parlor with the window cracked and changed something irrevocably and had not been able to stop it. Cecile did not step back. She held on. The librarian folded the last chair. The lamp near the door threw a long warm rectangle across the floor. Outside, on 135th Street, February was conducting its business, cold and purposeful and entirely indifferent to what was happening inside this room, which was, as far as February was concerned, simply 2 women standing close together in a library after closing. What it was, as far as Cecile was concerned, was the end of the arrangement and the beginning of something that did not have a name yet and did not require one. "The poem," Estelle said. Her voice was still quiet. She had not looked away. "The last stanza." "Yes," Cecile said. "You put me in the 3rd row." "You were in the 3rd row." A pause. Something moved through Estelle's face, not quite a smile, something underneath a smile, something that was the feeling a smile was made of. "I was," she said. "I know you were," Cecile said. "I saw you the moment I walked in." Another pause. Longer. The kind that had its own weight. "Cecile," Estelle said. "Yes. I have been," she stopped. She began again, and Cecile heard in the pause the cost of it, the particular cost for a woman who had spent a lifetime deciding with precision what to offer and what to keep. "I have been trying to maintain a sensible distance." "I know," Cecile said. "It has been entirely unsuccessful." "I know that too." Estelle looked at her. "I am not certain I know how to do this," she said. Her voice was very even. She was telling the truth the way she told the truest things, without decoration, without the performance of vulnerability, just the plain fact of it. I am not certain I've done it before. Cecile thought of Odette's story. The woman who knew how to be wanted but had not yet learned how to be loved. The woman who was terrified of being known and who wanted, more than anything, to be. I'm not certain either, Cecile said. I've been doing the wrong version of it for years. She looked at their joined hands. I think we do it anyway. Estelle was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. I think we do. Outside, the city. Inside, the library. The lamp. The folded chairs. Two women, 1 foot apart, holding on. Cecile thought, I have been writing toward this for 17 years and I did not know it, and now I do, and I am not going to let it be anything other than what it is. She thought, I am here. I see you. I am not performing this. She held Estelle's hand and stood in the warm particular silence of the thing that had become irrevocable, and she was not afraid, and she was not performing, and she was entirely herself. That was enough. That was, she thought, everything. Chapter 16, What the Music Always Knew. There is a kind of grief that arrives late. Not for what you lost, but for how long you lived without knowing what you had. For every year you moved through the world using the wrong map, calling the territory by the wrong name, writing poems about longing and addressing them to no one in particular when you could have, if you had known yourself sooner, addressed them where they belonged. Cecile would feel this grief, sometimes, in the years that followed. On ordinary afternoons. On mornings when she woke to the sound of Estelle at the piano in the next room, playing something new, and lay still to listen with her whole body, and thought, I could have known this longer. I could have had more of this. The grief was real. She did not try to make it smaller than it was. But grief, she was learning, could live alongside joy without canceling it. Could live alongside the particular mundane extraordinary fact of this woman, this kitchen, this argument about whether the window should be open, this January morning, this life, without canceling any of it. Estelle, who had her own version of this grief, understood. They did not often speak of it directly. They spoke of it the way they spoke of many things, sideways, in the particular shorthand of two people who had spent their lives using music and language to say the things they could not say out loud and were only now, slowly, learning that out loud was also available. Learning that the woman across the kitchen table in the morning light was capable of holding the full weight of the true thing and was not going to use it against you. That learning took time. It was, Cecile thought, the most important work either of them had ever done. The weeks after the reading were quiet. The arrangement had ended, which meant the public architecture of it, the dinners, the society pages, the careful management of appearances, was no longer required. What replaced it had no name for a while. They didn't rush to name it. Names were for other people, for the landladies and the neighbors and the editors who came to visit and learn it, over time and without being told, not to ask certain questions. For themselves, it was enough to know. What they knew was this: Cecile's notebook lived on the kitchen table, which happened to be Estelle's kitchen table, in the apartment on 131st Street where Estelle had lived for 4 years. The move had not been announced, it had accumulated, the way things did. A book left there, then another. A dress in the wardrobe. The particular arrangement of the things on the washstand that you didn't think about until they were there, and it seemed they had always been there. Cecile had kept her apartment on 127th until March, when the lease came up, and then she had not renewed it, and that had been that. Dorothea had said nothing about this except, "You owe me a new best friend, since yours has been promoted." She had then appeared for dinner twice a week and shown no signs of feeling displaced. August had said, "Finally." And then, when Estelle gave him the look, had said, "What?" "I have been waiting." Rollins had been quieter about it than Estelle expected. He had come to the apartment one afternoon in February, hat in hand and wearing the expression of a man who had arrived to account for something, and he had sat at the kitchen table with his gold watch and not consulted it once during the conversation that followed, and he had said, "I had meant the arrangement as a solution. I did not, at the time, think carefully enough about what a solution of that kind asked of you." He had been brief and direct, and he had not tried to explain it away. Estelle had listened and said, "I know." And then, because it was true, I don't think you were wrong to try to protect what we'd built. He had nodded, once, and that had been sufficient. The world, outside, was the world. It did not transform itself in February 1926 and become a place where two women could be entirely themselves without the management of appearances. Cecile understood this, Estelle had always understood it. The management continued, it simply protected a different thing now. Not a fiction, not an arrangement, but a life. Their life. The thing they had built in the space between the performance and the private self, the space that had turned out to be enormous. There were neighbors who did not ask and knew anyway. There were evenings when one of them was introduced as the other's companion, and the word was understood to mean exactly as much as it was given to mean and not less. There were rooms where both women walked in and the room was simply glad to have them, and rooms where the gladness was more measured, and they learned, over time, which rooms were which. None of this was simple. It was not supposed to be simple. What it was theirs. In March, Cecile published the poem. The Crisis ran it in the spring issue, submitted 6 weeks after the reading, with the pronoun unchanged. She had sat at the kitchen table for an afternoon before submitting it, with the poem and a cup of cold coffee, and Estelle had been at the piano in the next room working through something, and Cecile had read the last stanza one more time, "There is a woman in the third row," and had not changed anything. She had sent it. 3 weeks after the issue came out, the letters began to arrive. Some were from the editors of other publications, which was its own kind of thing. Some were from men and women she had met at literary evenings, praise offered with the particular quality of people who had found themselves in the work. But the letters she kept, that she collected in a box under the bed, that she sometimes took out in the evenings and read with Estelle beside her, were from women she would never meet. Women in places like Baltimore and Atlanta and Chicago and a small town in Mississippi, writing in careful handwriting on the stationery of ordinary lives, and saying the same thing in their different voices. I thought I was the only one. I had been writing the same poem for years and not knowing what it was. I read your poem and understood something I had been waiting to understand. She kept every letter. She thought about the geography of private longing, how vast it was, how populated, how many people were moving through it alone with the wrong maps. She thought about the 12-year-old girl in New Orleans who had watched a woman walk across a room and had no name for what she felt and had spent 17 years learning the wrong language. She wrote back to the ones who gave a return address. She did not know if it helped. She thought it must. She hoped it did. In April, Estelle finished the recording. It had been a production in the manner that all Estelle's productions were, exacting, particular, requiring 4 sessions to get the piano exactly right and a conversation with her trombonist that lasted 2 hours and resulted in 3 small changes that were, when she heard the playback, absolutely worth the 2 hours. Cecile had sat through one of the sessions, in the back of the recording studio with her notebook open in her lap, watching Estelle work, and had filled 6 pages without meaning to and understood, by the end of the session, that none of it was about music. The record label was arrangement in blue and leaving. Her name in the composer credit, V. Beaumont. She had written the liner notes herself. Cecile had not asked to read them beforehand, and Estelle had not offered. The notes arrived in the apartment with the advance copies, 2 pages, small and dense, discussing the composition in the technical language of someone who understood harmony the way Cecile understood syntax. And at the end, a sentence that was not technical, for C, who finally showed me. Cecile read this in the kitchen. She set the record sleeve down on the table and was quiet for a moment. Then Estelle came in from the next room, not having looked at her face, and said, "Coffee?" "Yes," Cecile said. Estelle made the coffee. She set a cup at Cecile's elbow. She looked at the record sleeve on the table, and then at Cecile, and something moved through her face, the private look, the one that was not for rooms. "Is it all right?" Estelle said. Cecile looked at her. At the extraordinary face she had been cataloguing since October and had now catalogued for months, in the good light and the grey light, in the morning and the evening, in every mood and in the particular state of absolute unself-consciousness that Estelle only arrived at when she was entirely in the music. "Yes," Cecile said. "It's more than all right." Estelle nodded once. She sat down across the table and drank her coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the April morning, and did not perform contentment because she was not performing anything, and neither was Cecile, and the kitchen was warm and the coffee was good, and outside Harlem was conducting its ordinary extraordinary life. This was the thing. The thing Cecile had been writing toward for 17 years without knowing what it was. Not drama, not resolution, not the moment of clarity in the empty room. Those were real, and she was glad of them, but they were not the thing. The thing was this. The ordinary morning. The kitchen table. The woman across from her who had learned, slowly and at cost, that being known was not the same as being destroyed. The thing was here. They had come to themselves late, by some measures. By others, they had arrived precisely on time. This was not a comforting thought, exactly. Cecile was too honest for that comfort, and Estelle too precise. The years were the years. The wrong grammar was the wrong grammar. The cost was real and the grief was real, and neither of them pretended otherwise. But there was also this: they were here. They had survived the arrangements they had made to survive their lives, and those arrangements had delivered them, with the peculiar logic of things that happen as they need to each other. The mechanism had served its purpose, and the purpose had turned out to be larger than the mechanism. Estelle, who thought in music, said once that it was like a piece that required a complicated key change to arrive at its home key. The complexity wasn't the failure of the piece, it was the path. Cecile, who thought in language, had written it down in her notebook and then decided it was too neat and crossed it out and written underneath, "We arrived." That's the poem. The rest is commentary. She kept both. On a morning in January, many months after the reading, Cecile woke to the sound of Estelle playing in the next room. It was early. The light through the curtain was the white-gray light of winter, the kind that had no warmth in it but was honest about what it was. She could hear, from the next room, the piano, not performing, not rehearsing, but the sound of Estelle simply playing, the way she played when she was thinking, working something out, finding the shape of a thing before she knew what it was. Cecile lay still. She listened with her whole body. The sound moved through the apartment the way it always did, finding the door frames, the plaster walls, the particular acoustic of a room that had come to know its instrument. It was something new. She could tell by the way Estelle kept pausing, adjusting, coming back to a phrase and working it differently. Something that did not yet have a name. She did not reach for her notebook. She had thought, in earlier months, that she would always want to translate this, that the poet's instinct was too deeply written in her to simply receive music without immediately converting it into language. She had been wrong about that, which was one of the better things she had been wrong about. She did not need to translate this. She did not need to write toward it. She was already here, inside it, in the warm room with the winter light coming through the curtain and the sound of Estelle at the piano in the next room playing something new. She already knew what it said. The music said, "I am here." The music said, "I am not performing this." The music said, "The window is cracked, and the February air is coming in, and there is someone in the next room listening, and I am playing for her, and this is the most private and the most true thing I have done, and I am not keeping it." Cecile lay in the winter light and listened and was not afraid and was not performing and was entirely herself. She thought, "I could have known this longer." She thought, "I know it now." She thought, "That is enough." That is, in fact, everything. Outside, Harlem moved and breathed and blazed, and inside the apartment on 131st Street a woman lay still and listened to the music in the next room, and the music was no longer kept. It had been given, freely, to one person. It was enough. The music played on.